think we can make a start. Good evening, everyone. You're very welcome at this meeting of the Planning Applications Committee. I'm Councillor James Husband, Chairman of the Committee. To my right are four of my colleagues who are fellow councillors, and it will be the five of us who will be making the decisions on the cases in front of us this evening. We're also joined by officers, mainly sitting to my left. They're going to introduce the reports that are in front of the committee, and this evening the officer team is led by Lisa Chung, lady sitting immediately to my left, and she is Lisa's the head of development management. Okay. So can we make a start by asking, are there any apologies for absence? There are none. Thank you. Declarations of interest, colleagues. Malcolm first.
Chairman, on the item for Chatsworth Court, which is number 5 on the agenda, I do know Mr. North extremely well. We work in my ward together, and we're both members of the Earls Court Society, but I have not discussed this case with him at all. And so I think I've got a clear, open mind on it.
That's helpful. Aaron.
Thank you, Chairman. Same, I've known Lloyd for about, I don't know, maybe 6 years, but haven't discussed with him, so very open-minded. Thank you.
I've known Lloyd since 2014, but I haven't discussed the case with him.
And Councillor Larry, you perhaps don't know Mr. North, but if I could just add that I think in relation to Chatsworth Court, I'm in a slightly different position to my colleagues in that, as well as knowing the objector, I also know the applicant's family well. So I think in the circumstances, I think it's right that I step to one side when this item is considered, and I think I would suggest, I'm not sure if we formally have to agree this, but I would suggest that Councillor Spalding chairs that item on the agenda. Colleagues, is that acceptable? Are we agreed with that?
I'd like to second that. Agreed.
Okay, and I think that's all agreed. Good. The other matter, just briefly, I'd like to say, there's also an application at Lexington Gardens on the agenda. Now, this property it's in my ward. There have been many applications at 66 Lexington Gardens, including cases which I have sat on the committee. However, I haven't discussed the specific matter in front of us this evening with anybody. So as a result, I think it's in order that I chair the meeting and I'm able to participate in that decision making. Okay. If there are no other declarations, then I think we can move on, please. If we can consider, we have actually 2 sets of minutes. The first set of minutes is for the 21st of September meeting, and actually I think all of us on the panel this evening were in fact present. So can I sign those as a record, please? Great. And we also have minutes. We also have minutes for the meeting that was on the 5th of October, and I think on that occasion, actually, Councillor Spalding and I both sat. Can we agree that I sign those minutes as well? Thank you. Very good. Thank you. Okay. In that case, we can move on to the main business. I think it might help everyone if I just indicated the order in which we're going to consider the cases. In a few moments, we're going to start with Coronation Court, then St Quentin Avenue, Paradise Walk, Lexington Gardens. We will then move on to Chatsworth Court, Pembroke Crescent, the Latimer Academy in Preston Road, the applications for Prince's Gate, then the Royal Marsden Hospital, Collingham Place, and concluding with Pond House. And I apologise in advance. It's quite a long agenda, and if the thing that you're interested in is quite a long way down the agenda, unfortunately you're going to end up having to wait. I'm sorry, there's nothing obviously we can do about that. So in that case, let's get going, and I think Derek Taylor is going to introduce the first item, which is Coronation Court. So Derek, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, could I just draw the committee's attention to a letter from Councillor Healy that I think has been laid on your desk before you, that was just received this afternoon. So hope you've had a chance to look at that. Right, so this application proposes an additional story to Coronation Court to provide 4 flats with a lift extension at the rear. And I'll just show you some slides to illustrate it. The first image there shows you in plan form the block. So it's essentially, it's got a recess at the front with a sort of courtyard garden, and you'll see the block sort of wrapping around the three other sides of the site. This photograph is taken looking sort of roughly southbound, and you can see there the application block, Coronation Court, is to the right-hand side of the image, and you're looking along High Lever Road there with the block to the right. That's from North Pearl Road. And then that's now taken from within Brewster Gardens, and you can see the block there without the additional story, obviously, with the form, with the garden in the middle, with the flat roof as described. The image there, that's the Brewster Gardens elevation, and you can see in the top image that's the existing elevation to Brewster Gardens, and in the lower image that's the additional story that you see on top of the block. So you can see there that it's set back from the edges, from the parapet that runs around the roof, and it takes up basically the roof space at the centre. And then that's the side elevation. You can see there the lift extension, which is to the left-hand side of the block in that image, and then the additional story running across the roof above that. The additional story would have a green roof, at its upper level. And then that's the proposed front elevation in drawing form. And that's a section through it, so you can see there how the structure of it and that the height of it relates to the existing floor heights in the building. And then that's the proposed side elevation. Again, you can see there the lift extension at the back of the building on the left-hand side of that image. And then that's the proposed plan. And that was the last slide, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. If we can first hear from, I think, the objectors who've registered to speak. Hello, hi. So perhaps if you introduce yourselves, and then when you're ready, you've got up to 3 minutes shared between you. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Yes, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Duncan Duff. I've lived in Brewster Gardens, number 9 Brewster Gardens, for 25 years, which is directly opposite Coronation Court.
My name is Alison Williams. I live in Coronation Court. I've been there for more than 20 years.
Thank you. According to the planning report, the decisive issues are: 1, the impact on the existing living conditions enjoyed by neighbouring residents; 2, whether or not the proposal will preserve or enhance the character of the conservation area. Let me quote from the local plan. Policy CL1, respect the existing context, character and appearance, including being inclusive for all. This development fails on all counts and is the epitome of exclusive. Metal and glass penthouses with a private lift slapped on top of a 1930s brick building against the wishes of the residents of same building. The borough needs more housing, more affordable housing, yes, but not more exclusive millionaire penthouses at the expense of residents' living conditions. The glass walls will result in loss of privacy for surrounding properties. Quote, terraces can be visually intrusive and result in serious intrusion into the privacy and quiet enjoyment of neighbouring residential properties. I couldn't have put it better myself. It's from the local plan. All of the surrounding properties will suffer loss of privacy, noise and disturbance because of the roof terraces. Policy CL8. The Council will require additional stories to be architecturally sympathetic to the age and character of the building and group of buildings. This is situated in a conservation area, a narrow street of Victorian housing. Heritage Report describes Coronation Court as a neutral building that blends into the townscape by virtue of form, scale and materials, but fails to make a positive contribution. If you change the form, the scale and the materials, as you propose to allow, it will no longer be a neutral building and it will make a negative contribution to the conservation area. On the decisive issues, the arguments are overwhelmingly against the proposal. I ask the committee to reject. I now pass to Ali Williams. Thank you.
Thank you. Despite the sweetener of £75,000 offered by the developers to the residents of Coronation Court, there's a strong majority feeling to oppose this development. Why? Fire. We lose our fire escape to the roof that we've had for 20 years. About a year ago, we had a site visit from an independent fire safety officer recommending a change in policy after 20 years to stay put, which, as everyone in this borough knows, relies on compartmentalisation, which we do not have. Our staircases are open across all floors. This is not a safe policy for us. Light. The lighting report ignores the effect of light loss and noise disruption to our immediate rear neighbours, the sheltered housing unit on Nursery Lane. I spoke to the manager this morning, she knew nothing about it. There's no mention of them in your report, which is discriminatory, selective and discredits your report. Huge loss of light to our central block stairwell from the lift shaft. Was there a site visit? If so, when and by whom? The lift is for penthouse only, which is socially divisive and goes against your own policies. So I urge you to consider the safety and security of current residents and the comfort and welfare of our elderly neighbours of this borough, to whom we all owe a duty of care. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Can I just apologise for our extremely fast pace?
Yeah, no.
But it is extremely difficult to fit everything into 3 minutes.
We're well used to that. Thank you. No, that's understood. Now, I think a number of representatives of the applicant have registered. Would you like to care to introduce yourselves? Would someone like to start? I'm sorry, I believe, is there a Mr. Matheson who's the
Yes, hello.
Yep.
Yes, I'm Mark Matheson. I'm the agent for this application.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So in similar fashion, between you, you've got up to 3 minutes as well. So please go ahead when you're ready.
Yes. Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. My name is Mark Matheson of Stratagem Planning Consultants, representing my client, Joe Griffin of London Penthouse Limited, the scheme before you this evening to provide 4 high-quality new homes. I'm joined by my client, as well as by the architect, Martin King of Douglas & King Architects, and by Robert Maycox, who prepared the Daylight and Sunlight report which accompanies this application. My client and colleagues will be pleased to answer any questions that you may have. We've worked extremely hard over the past 2 years to create a scheme which has full backing from officers. We submitted a pre-application inquiry in 2019, and the advice that we received has informed the changes to the scheme. Before I outline the significant benefits of the scheme, I'd like to address some of the points that the objectors have raised. With respect to the lift, in the pre-application scheme, the lift was set out from the back of the building, leaving existing stair windows on 2 of the landings intact. We were advised that the lift should be attached directly to the back of the building so as to minimise the visual impact externally. This we've done and have positioned the lift so as to retain some natural light for the stairs. With respect to fire, the Right to Manage company, which represents the owners of the flats in the building, instructed AGO fire Safety Services to prepare a combined health, safety and fire risk assessment in February of this year. The report notes that use of the roof as a fire escape, and I quote, is no longer suitable due to the presence of significant trip hazards in the form of drain pipes and cables and a lack of emergency lighting. It is therefore recommended that all 3 exit doors be secured and appropriate signage be affixed to each door forbidding entry to the roof. I also mentioned that the applicant has consulted the London Fire Brigade, who confirmed by way of letter dated 27th of November 2020 that the Commissioner is satisfied with the proposals, subject to the comments dated the 10th of the 11th 2020. With respect to design, the building is located within the Oxford Gardens and St Quintin Conservation Area. While most of the buildings within the conservation area are identified as positive contributors to the conservation area, the subject property is identified as being neutral in terms of its impact. We believe that the proposed high-quality roof extension would add architectural interest to a building which has been explicitly identified as being of limited architectural value. The heritage statement which we submitted in support of the application sets out in detail an assessment of the impact of the proposed extension on the conservation area. I'll finish by outlining some of the significant benefits associated with the scheme. The development will produce 4 new high-quality residential units which will contribute to the greatly increased housing target for RBKC under the 2021 London Plan, including targets specifically in relation to small sites. The extension is a subtle and understated addition to the building and to the conservation area, built of high-quality materials and designed by a developer and architecture practice with a strong track record of delivering high-quality developments. The new units will be highly sustainable and will significantly improve the thermal performance of the existing third-floor flats. And as we've heard already, the developer is making a contribution of £75,000 to upgrade the common parts of the existing building.
I'm going to have to ask you to conclude at that point, yeah?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so colleagues, the way this works is that members of the councillors are able to ask questions, but I'm afraid you aren't able to cross-examine, if you see what I mean. Who would like to go first on this? Maxwell and then Sina.
Thank you, Chair. My question's for the applicant. The objectors mentioned concerns about use of metal and glass for the penthouses. Why have those materials been used for the penthouse opposed to bricks to match the rest of the building?
I'd like to refer your question to the architect, if I may.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark. This is a roof extension, so it's really important that we're not actually adding a 5th floor onto the building, we're actually adding a roofscape. So we're looking at lightweight materials. The metallic material that's been chosen for the facade is in a colour to match the brickwork of the building below. It's a lightweight material, and it's also it's known for its longevity. It's also incredibly sustainable as a cladding system, 100% recyclable. So there's many advantages to the metallic roof, which is something that is actually historically prevalent all over our city. The glass, it was referred to as having the glass specified is called reglit, and it's actually a translucent glass, so you can't actually see through it, but it allows plenty of daylight into the apartments. So yes, we've got a lightweight structure. We're going to be building a grillage over the top of the existing roof. Once the grillage is in place, the actual disruption to the apartments during the construction phase is minimal, and that's also informed by the lightweight materials that we're using at the roof extension level. But the colours and the tones and the textures that are chosen for the roofscape are all taken through by testing from the various views around the building. You can see that.
One additional question, this time to the objectors. On the same subject, if we were minded to approve this, do you have any preference of the materials used? Or, because obviously you mentioned that the metal and glass is of concern.
Well, I mean, in the first instance, I would say that the building is described as neutral, it's not a particularly aesthetically pleasing building, but it blends in. What I object to here is that, so yes, in answer to your question, the short answer is yes, if it were made of brick, and if they weren't adding roof terraces and large expanses of glass which exacerbate the loss of living conditions in terms of being overlooked and losing your privacy. The residents will enjoy the terraces. They will literally look down on the rest of us. They will make noise and disturbance, which won't have to be policed by the developer, but it will have to be dealt with by the council down the line, and no, it's not for the planning committee. So the short answer is yes, if they were actually proposing affordable housing and adding an additional story to the block, and it was unobtrusive, I suppose I would have much less grounds for objecting, and I would be less sort of moved by this proposal than I am by the socially divisive, literally, symbolically, architecturally, and socially, it is saying this is being plonked on top of completely different scale, cost of accommodation, and it's going to lead to absolute division. And the fact that to get there, you have to ask the residents of Coronation Court to sacrifice light. You can see from the middle of their windows in some of their apartments, you will see the infrastructure of the lift, because of course these people can't walk upstairs. It's a millionaire lifestyle. It's being sold with you have views across this and the other. They will use the terraces a great deal. So the short answer is yes, if it were a modest brick extension, an additional story, I would have much less objection.
Thank you. That's my
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sina. Thank you, Chairman. Just a follow-up question following Councillor Maxwell to the agent. I'm just touching on the point where the objector have mentioned about this see-through glass privacy option. What percentage of your construction in the penthouse is made of glass, opposed to the brick and wall or the structure?
We don't have an exact sort of percentage figure, but the translucent element is actually against the corridors at the entrance level on the front of the building, which you can see. I don't know if you could put up the front elevation there.
Is there a photo
have
or
it
something?
on my iPad here. I want to point out that the glass, the actual clear glass elements of the roof extension are set back from the parapet. So they're not actually directly on the edge of the building. They're not overlooking. But the translucent elements are the bits adjacent to the entrance. Yeah, exactly, on there. You can see them to the left and the right of the central bay. But you can see the glass windows at the top. To the left and the right, you've got the symmetrical bays on the end of the building. You've got the roof extension above it, and you've got clear glass to the apartments on that side, but they're well set back behind the parapet.
All right, thank you. Just to follow up.
Yeah, you can see there the percentage. I mean, it's looking like it's about 30 to 40% to me, if that helps.
Right, are you confident it's not a see-through glass, as you mentioned in your speech earlier?
Part of it is reglet. Yeah, that reglet is commonly used. It's a great material because it's actually a fireproof glass, and that's why it's put adjacent to entrance doors, because obviously you've got a fire escape route on each side of the entrance. But it also, it adds privacy, because you're coming out of the central door there and you're heading towards the apartments on each side, and you're going past the windows that will be lighting the corridors of the flats in the middle, and that's why that's translucent.
Would you be happy to show it to the residents and the objectors if you get a chance to before your construction?
Yes, of course. We would work very closely with the residents, especially on a very sensitive site like this. It's very important that we, with our construction management plan, we build in a program of engagement. Also, we have a long track record of that with our contractor client.
Anything you would like to add?
I'm sorry.
I would just add that in her report, the case officer has said that the lightweight appearance of the materials would be an appropriate solution to ensure that the new story is recessive. Had we proposed a new story that was in the same material as the existing building, I think it's very unlikely that officers would have supported the scheme on design grounds. I think it would have been seen as too visually dominant, and it's explicitly in order to reduce the visual dominance of the extension that it is proposed to construct it in these materials to reduce the visual dominance.
Thank you, Sina.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, on the matter of fire, to the objectors, you heard the applicants mention that the roof escape would be inappropriate. Before I get on to my next question, could you just quickly respond to that, because I found it a significant point.
Yes, I can. Thank you. Basically, I'm not sure if it was the freeholder or who it was, came and put a load of drain pipes when they were trying to sell, he was trying to sell the head lease. He put some drain pipes just on the roof, and that's what the fire safety guy said. I was with him. He said, "Oh, that's a trip hazard." Well, it hasn't been there for 20 years. We did not know where it came from. It was there when they were showing the sellers, whoever sells our roof to whoever buys it. So that's the point I'd like to make. Thank you.
And is it still correct that no fire strategy has been submitted in regards to?
No, this is a fire strategy that we've got, which is stay put. And I'd just like to add that I was in a fire in that building in March 2017, and it was a really frightening night of my life, and we went up to the roof, so I just kind of want to add that, okay?
Okay. And Mr. Matheson, are you aware of New London Plan Policy D12?
With regards to fire safety,
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with the detail of it, but I'm aware that there is a new policy.
But given there has been significant concern from residents about the lack of fire standards being proposed with the new story, what's your sort of solution to that? How are you getting around that?
Well, my client instructed an approved inspector to check the proposed drawings prior to submission for planning. The approved inspector contacted the London Fire Brigade to ask them if they were satisfied that the proposals were acceptable, and the London Fire Brigade have written back to confirm that they are happy with the proposed arrangements.
So is there a fire strategy document which we can read?
The RTM,
It's either a yes or no question, really.
Sorry? Yeah, so I'm saying that there was a as I mentioned earlier, there was a combined health, safety and fire risk assessment carried out by the owners of the flats in the building, and it was that report that advised that the roof should not be used by way of a fire escape.
But that's not I asked if there's a fire strategy document, because clearly you've now altered the existing, you're now putting to us that there's a sudden change to what everyone understands to be the incumbent procedure when it comes to fire. You've put it to us tonight that this is now changing, and there is no fire strategy document as far as I'm aware, which is what I'm finding slightly odd.
Hi there, sorry, if I can just jump in. I am Joe Griffin, I'm the applicant. I hopefully will be the developer. As Mark pointed out, the proposed scheme has been approved by Building Control and has been put forward to the London Fire Brigade, and the London Fire Brigade have supported the scheme and given us clear pointers on what we propose to do to the existing building would actually enhance the fire integrity and
how would it do that? The reason I'm asking is because this committee uses D12, and I know because I've sat on here for quite a while, has used D12 as grounds for rejecting applications, solely based on that policy. So if there is no fire strategy document, and the procedure is suddenly changed, which everyone understands, and you've just announced this change tonight, what are these enhancements as a result of this proposed application? What is the enhancement?
So the enhancement is that all the existing flat entrance doors within the block are not compliant with FD30 SSC. As part of our proposal, we will change and alter and bring up to standards to FD30 SSC all the existing apartment doors within the block.
But you haven't said how you do that because there's no fire strategy document. Anyway, let me just get on to the next question.
I
Because
think actually,
this is right.
I think Councillor Norrie, I think we need to be careful. I think these technical issues are really ones that we should pursue with officers, because obviously D12 relates to the London plan, obviously a recently adopted document. So I think we'll have to pursue that later.
No, I just find it odd that the applicants don't know. But anyway, to my next question.
Okay, well, yeah, let's move on.
What is the sort of market value of the new apartments being proposed?
I would question whether that's a material planning consideration.
No, I'm asking you the question, not asking me the question. I just asked you a question. And I'm the planning committee member making the decision, so I can ask what I want.
As planning consultant, that is not a matter that I'm concerned with.
Okay, so you don't know?
I don't know, and I don't believe that there's any reason for me to know that, actually.
Okay, because I mean, is it going to be sort of market value, or is it going to be affordable housing, key worker housing, or social housing? I mean, you can give an answer around those terms.
Yeah, I mean, these are clearly going to be market housing, and you know there are significant costs involved in creating these, and you know, it only stacks up if they're market housing for the developer.
Sure, because I mean, in this respect, you may be aware that the borough is sort of already filled with empty homes. You make a big point about the fact that we need more housing, but I could put it to you, is market value housing in North Kensington or South Kensington, for example, given the number of empty market value luxury properties that already exist, is that the necessity? I mean, that's another concern I might have to raise with you. Those are all my questions for now. Otherwise, I might come back to you later.
Good. Okay. Well, I would suggest, are there any other questions? Because I think now we should move on. Sir, I'm afraid, unfortunately, the way a planning meeting works, you have to register to speak, and otherwise, I'm afraid you're not able to talk. Yeah. No. Yeah. 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 No. Yeah. 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 No. Okay. All right. You've been able to make those couple of points. Thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry. Look, I'm afraid this is a planning applications committee meeting. It's a meeting held in public, but it's not a public meeting. I think I'm. Well, no, it's in the pack of documentation that we all have. All of the members of the committee will have received all of the representations, and they are all in front of us, and we are able to ask people questions. So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you. No, I'm afraid, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to sit down, and because people have had the opportunity to speak, but this is not a public meeting, just a general discussion about something. Unfortunately, as I think probably most people appreciate, these meetings have to have a structure because we're actually making a formal decision about a planning application. Now, can I suggest that we move on?
No, I have one more question, sorry.
Right.
It's regarding...
Is this a planning matter?
Yes, it's about the lift.
All right, go on.
Is the lift... I just noticed from the objector's speeches that the lift, they alleged, only accessible to those new residents on that top floor. Is that correct?
As things stand, that is the position. However, my client would be very happy to enter into discussions with any other parties who have flats within that part of the building who would like to also benefit from that lift. Obviously, it would require anyone who was going to be benefiting from that lift to be prepared to contribute to the service charge for that lift. But in principle, my client would be more than happy to enter into discussions with anyone who would like to benefit from
Because
that
this
lift.
borough doesn't do poor doors or poor lifts anymore, especially since the Grenfell Tower disaster. So I mean, it's another concern of mine. I've just picked it up tonight.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much indeed for those questions and also the comments made. So, colleagues, now it's our opportunity to ask officers questions. Markham, would you like to go first?
Thank you, Chairman. Of course, we have to confine ourselves to planning issues, and they're very strictly defined. There are all sorts of other issues, but they might be building control. So on planning itself, looking at the architecture of this, can I ask, in planning terms, this single-storey roof extension is within the curtilage of the building. So if this was not in a conservation area, would that be automatically permitted development?
I just have to think quite quickly there, because I don't actually have the permitted development criteria here. I mean, there would be permitted development rights in a different situation to add a story to a block similar to this, yes. But they don't apply in this case, though.
Somebody raised that there would be balconies on the top floor. Those horizontal white bars in the middle of the block, are those existing balconies?
The block has balconies at the lower levels at the moment, yes. Not at the roof level. The roof level is just a flat roof at the moment.
Thank you, Chair. I think you would call this top hatting, I suppose, as an activity in terms of putting an extra floor in a building. How common is this type of application, and also how common is it to have a lift that only goes to the roof?
In terms of the lift, it's difficult to say. I mean, a lift typically would serve every floor of a building rather than simply go to the roof. There's no town planning reason why a lift couldn't go straight to the roof. I mean, no planning policy touches that. I mean, all I can say is typically lifts do serve more floors than just one, but it's probably not unique. I suspect there are buildings
So we
which
couldn't
may
put a
have one or
requirement.
more
We
floors
could,
served by different lifts.
we couldn't have put in a requirement that it has to serve all floors, for example. No.
No, I'm not sure in town planning terms where that requirement, how that requirement would be justified.
Okay.
I mean, it might seem like a good idea, it might seem like common sense, but planning policies don't go to that level of detail within a block.
Then my other
within a
question is, it's a green roof. What's the definition of a green roof? And do we have any conditions around maintenance of that roof?
I mean, green roofs do come in lots of different forms, but I mean, in terms of definition, it would be a roof that has a live plant covering, as opposed to a shiny hard finish. I mean, it means it's a live roof, effectively. I mean, the purpose of that is obviously environmental, fundamentally. That the green roof would provide some oxygen and would also soak up some rainwater.
Do we have any conditions on maintenance of that? Because my worry is you get this nice green roof and then everything dies on the roof. Are there conditions around that in terms of maintenance? Can we put in conditions for that?
I mean, there is always a problem with a green roof, or indeed a green wall, you know, the vertical form. I mean, any source of green wall or green roof can die, clearly. Some situations may not be suitable for them, particularly if light is limited. I mean, the plants that typically would form a green roof would need quite high light levels generally. But that wouldn't be an issue here. Obviously, it's a large upper roof that it would have very good light levels.
So can we put in a condition that it's maintained? Or is there a condition?
Yes. I mean, at the moment, I mean, in terms of the details, there's no detailed condition for the green roof, but obviously there could be.
I mean, we could add that if we wish.
That could have the words "and be so maintained" and so on attached to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to actually follow on the discussion about fire safety and in relation to the London Plan D12 policy. Now, how does that apply to this particular development? How does it fit into that? I don't know. I'd like to address that issue.
Well, I mean, it actually doesn't apply to this development. I mean, this isn't a major development. So, I mean, there's a planning definition for major development, which is when the London Plan D12 kicks in. And it's not relevant to just adding an additional story to a building such as this. That's why there is no fire statement as a requirement for the planning submissions at this stage. If it was a major development, then there would be. I mean, in this case, the applicants would appear to have started the process that they would need to start, which is to speak to the London Fire Brigade, and then ultimately, of course, to the Council's own Building Control Department. So that they would both have to be satisfied at the appropriate stage. The difference is that the appropriate stage in a situation like this can be after planning permission is granted, whereas D12 acts as a hook that brings that further forwards into the planning application stage.
Thank you, Chairman. Hi there. Just checking, could we put a condition on reducing the percentage of glass usage? Or is that a valid condition that we can enforce?
Sorry,
in terms of the construction where you've got...
I'm not entirely sure what the question is.
No, I'm just checking, can we reduce the percentage of glass usage and turning it to brick or some sort of material which is not visible, I mean, or transparent? Can we enforce that condition? I just checking.
We can enforce a condition on building material. We've done that before.
Yes, I mean, to a point, obviously planning conditions could seek to adjust the materials in a proposal. I think I'd be very cautious about doing it here. Firstly, because the glazing obviously has a number of functions. I mean, if glazing is to be reduced on the exterior, that could then influence the internal plan. A condition attempting to reduce glazing would have other implications, so I'm not sure that could be done reasonably without those implications being thought through. The other problem would be that, I mean, obviously there's an element of subjectivity. We've already heard some views that a brick additional story would be more appropriate. I mean, my view as a town planner would be that to actually add brick or more, should we say less glazing, put it another way around. I mean, to actually reduce the glazing would create a heavier roof structure. And certainly to my mind as a town planner, it makes good sense to have a roof addition that is relatively lightweight, is different to the structure and the appearance of the building beneath it. and that would be the more typical way to add an additional story to a building, rather than to make it as heavy as the supporting structure would appear beneath it. I think a condition, just to go back to your original question, a condition to reduce the glazing would have those implications that would need to be thought through as well. And I think for that reason, I'd suggest it wouldn't be a good condition.
Chair, I mean, I'm willing to propose, if Councillor Etty would second, a condition to remove glazing, because in the local plan and the approved neighbourhood plan, there is reference to congruency and the need for respect for the existing architectural ambiance, which is clearly, in my view, looking at the drawings, not what this application is doing. So I'm happy to propose a condition to remove glazing and the use of transparent and translucent glass as a material. Would you be happy to second that?
I'm not entirely asking to put a condition to reduce the glazing, but just a reduction of glass so that in terms of the objectives privacy.
No, I think, okay, we're at the point where we're asking officers about, as you say, potential conditions.
Yeah.
And I think we've had quite clear advice that actually a condition of the sort that you have floated the idea is probably not possible. I think if it was felt that there was simply far too much glazing in the proposed structure, then the correct course of action would be to vote to refuse the application. Okay, I think that would be the way. I think we've heard this is not something that could be done by condition. You can ask, a condition can ask for the materials to be presented for approval by officers. That's entirely appropriate. But I think to actually, in effect, you try and use a condition to redesign the building, that's not something that we are able to do.
So I should vote against the application?
Yes, I mean, if you feel the design is unacceptable on the basis there's an excessive amount of glazing, then that would be a reason to vote against the application. Yeah. Are there any other questions for officers? No. Okay. In that case, I think we need to make a decision. So the application is the application that is in front of us. Malcolm, just quickly.
Yeah, Chairman, just before we make a decision, I've listened to colleagues, and I think they're slightly misleading themselves, because we're looking at the application we've got, and the existing building is a rather lumpen, rather crude 1950s block with a lot of roof clutter, which makes it a very ugly building.
No, that's not what the CAA says. It says neutral building.
Councillor, you put your microphone
I said it makes it a rather ugly building with a lot of roof clutter. This is my subjective opinion about this architecture. And I think what the architect has done here is actually very clever. He's made this an attractive building. He's given us a very light one-floor extension, which, if this was not in the conservation area, would be permitted without a committee anyway. And he's sort of made it match the kind of roof treatment, I think, is very light, as it should be. I think it lifts the building. And we are here to look at the aesthetics of this and the future impact of it. Maybe in 100 years' time, would this building, if it was built, would it detract from the conservation area, or would it enhance it? And I think that building actually enhances it. That's just the way I'm thinking at the moment.
Chair, I wish to respond to that, please. 2 minutes. Councillor Spalding's subjectivity is negated by the objectivity of the Oxford Gardens Conservation Area appraisal, which clearly states that this is a neutral building. If it made a negative contribution, it would have been listed as a negative building. The objective opinion, which is based on fact, is that this is not a negative building, otherwise it would have been listed as such, and therefore Councillor Spalding's statement is frankly incorrect.
Well, I'm not quite sure. I think the way that conservation area statements are made is that there are a range of buildings. in truth, it's very unusual for a building to be identified as being negative. But I think obviously there's clearly a difference of opinion among my colleagues. Maxwell, what's your thought about this?
I mean, I think it is actually visually acceptable. I think it does actually improve the building. But my concern is the maintenance of the green roof, if we can put in a condition for that.
Okay. All right. Erin, is there anything you'd like to add to what's already been said?
Chair.
No. Okay, thank you very much. Well, in that case, we need to... No, I'm sorry. We're now about to make a... I'm now about to take a... Sir, we are about to actually have a vote to formally determine the application. I would like to suggest that we add a condition that the proposed green roof, were we minded to grant the application, we add a as and so maintained condition. Is that acceptable for officers? I would also note, we haven't discussed this, but the condition number 4 recommended in the officer's report actually says that the main roof is not to be used as a terrace. Okay, so I think we should note that in passing.
I'm sorry to correct you, but that's the green roof, not the roof with the terraces outside the apartments. I'm sorry, but that is a very, very... because I made that same mistake when I first read the report.
Right. Okay, I hesitate to go back, but can I just ask Mr. Taylor to just clarify, is that my understanding? Because I think we would not want, maybe it's necessary to have another condition, but I wouldn't want people to be able to come out of, if you like, out of the proposed new apartments, if they are approved, and be able to set up a sort of a terrace right on the parapet. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense, but I mean that's obviously an integral part of the proposal. I mean, so that there's a green roof on top.
Yes.
Which clearly one wouldn't want to be used as any source of terrace. I mean, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But an integral part of the design, though, is to have a narrow terrace that runs around the periphery of the roof.
Right.
So you can see that in all of these images, you can see the...
Right. And would it be possible, though, to condition, we do have standard conditions about people aren't able to have clutter put up there, umbrellas, enormous heaters, that kind of thing. I think that's something that we quite often do condition. I think
yes,
that would be appropriate, wouldn't it?
In terms of the appearance of the terraces, there's a standard condition that's often used, which precludes things like parasols, space heaters, tall items such as that. Roof cluster, in other words.
So colleagues, as well as the green roof and so maintained, I would suggest we add that condition as well, because I think that will help preserve amenity for people who are looking up or looking across at the proposal, if we were minded to grant. So
I'm sorry to interrupt, but it won't make any impact on the noise pollution, which the plan itself says is, would be major.
No, I'm sorry, you can't. Okay, so that's right. Mr. Taylor, you're quite clear about that. So, colleagues, the proposal in front of us, the recommendation is to grant, but with these 2 new conditions that we've just discussed with officers. So, can I see those in favour of granting with those conditions, please? And those against? Okay, so that's granted by 4 votes to 1. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. Can we now move on to consider the application at St Quintin's Avenue, please?
Right, so this is the second application in the North Pack. As you'll have seen from the report, it's proposed to install an amount of roof equipment, telecommunications equipment, to the main roof of the building. I'll just start with some photographs just to orientate you. So the application building is at the corner between St Quentin Avenue and High Lever Road, and you can see it there behind, sort of behind the trees, just showing through at the centre of the image. And then that's looking sort of roughly westwards along High Lever Road. Sorry, it's St Quentin Avenue, to get this straight. And you can see the application building on the left-hand side there, sort of to the left of the trees at the centre of the image. And then that's looking along High Lever Road, and there the brick building on the right-hand side is the application building. And that's what it looks like just closer in when you're standing immediately outside it in High Lever Road. You'll have seen the history sort of set out in the report. The first drawing that I'm showing you there is the existing building. What you will notice is that the existing building already has a significant sort of plant housing and overrun at the centre of it, which you can't see from street level, or at least from most street angles. You do pick it up in that photograph. But certainly closer in, you don't see that. That's the existing elevation in true elevation form, and then that's the elevation as permitted on appeal. So you'll have seen that discussed in the report. So that was something that was refused planning permission, but the inspector considered it should be granted on appeal. That's the appeal permission, and then that's what's now proposed. So if I go back to the appeal one, that had the telecommunications aerials had a more sort of horizontal sort of element to them, whereas now they've got a more vertical element to them. They don't stick out as far, but they are higher. And that's the last slide, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I think lady has registered to speak as an objector. Sir, actually, sorry, I beg your pardon. Looking at my wrong part of my list. So, as you've seen, you're obviously live in the property. When you're ready, please, you have up to 3 minutes to state your objection. So please go ahead when you're ready.
Okay. Hello everyone, I'm Mario Stam. I live in the property for the past 12 years on the top floor. This is not the first time I come to this committee because, as you know, there was a previous application has been refused, and we had some meetings with the Royal Board Council in Chelsea, Mr. Uva Akpata, who told us about the development in the past few years. Has been discussed, and with other residents, not from only this block here, and he told us that basically the Royal Borough Council in Chelsea, they opposed this development after discussion and consultation with us, but they had to give in because this new Ofcom electronic communication code that the developer can enforce that onto the landlords if they want to expand the installations, and the only way to prevent this is through the planning committee. This development, I strongly object because I think it will affect our lives massively. Not only because of the electromagnetic radiation, that whatever they say they're harmless, we still fear them, so they will still affect our mental health. I'm worried about, we only speak about the roof, but there is going to be a loss of green area on ground floor because this equipment here requires electric cabinet, massive electric cabinet that sits on the ground floor, and they will be sitting on a small green area that is the only one we have, and it's been a great relief during the past year pandemic when myself and my children, we cleaned it up and we planted tomatoes, stuff like that, and we really look after, and this will be gone. I'll be very concerned about the sound and noise these equipment do during high wind. I can invite the applicant to my office roof where there is such installation present, and I can tell you they make noise when the wind is strong. And another concern that the tenants have, it was the access for maintenance, which apparently is quite regular, and means a third-party person has right of access to the building through the roof for regular maintenance and works. Last but not least, remember the appearance of the building. It might not be the most appealing building, but it does not give the reason to add more to it, and the site is really appalling. The previous case, we were discussing the detailed design of a roof extension. We are a stone throw away from the house, and we're chucking up these horrible antennas on top. We are in a conservation area, and they can be seen from High Lever Road. It can be seen from that building we were discussing before, from that roundabout in front. It's not. I think the picture was not a bit deceiving, but these, the extension of these development can be seen from the surrounding area. That is it. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Colleagues, any questions? Arian, would you like to go first?
Thank you, Chairman. Not rather a question, but a comment. But Mr. Stablin, I mean, I've objected for this antenna in my ward. I just want to make a point about the noise thing. I don't think the antennas would generally produce any noise. I've done a lot of research on this. That's just a comment. But in terms of ICNRPF threshold, it's been proven the radiation levels won't exceed, which would be harmful for human as a perception. But I share your concern and frustration on the all other elements that you just mentioned about the sentiment, the maintenance and everything. So
okay.
That's just a comment.
Just
Thank you.
very briefly, if you'd like to respond to that comment, please go ahead. Yeah.
I'm not just saying, yeah, I know the design of the antenna is windproof, but it's not only an antenna, it's all sort of different equipment, the infrastructure, all the key clamp system that is there has to be carefully installed for not to vibrate and makes noise and maintained. And what if it doesn't? I live on the top floor right underneath it. What if vibration and transmitted through? It's a concrete building, it's quite difficult to isolate. And I don't want to find myself in the future having to ring every 2 weeks. And you know, these people, they don't respond quite quickly and come and fix the problem. Once they're up there, and we have to live with it, we know that. I mean, Latimer Road is just, they have an industrial building all around and is outside the conservation area. Why have not been considered that area? I don't know.
Yeah, I think my proposal to the Cornerstone was simple, you know, that they identify sites that commercial rather than residential. I made a brief advisory suggestion, but obviously I think sadly the 5G requires antennas every 400 meters. I think that's hence probably your building was chosen anyway. That's just my answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Malcolm.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a pity that the applicants are not here, because maybe Mr. Stablum knows the answer. It follows on Councillor Arietti's point. Do you know why? Who owns your building, and why have they chosen to have this equipment put on a residential building? Because you made a very wise suggestion. They could have used a nearby industrial building. So do you know who's the freeholder of your building, and why did they choose your building?
The freeholder of the building is the council, is the Royal Borough of Kensington, Chelsea. Yeah, and these telecom operator did not only pick my building. There was a number of houses that were earmarked for this installation, and they submitted planning for all of them. So for them is a business development. They just submit it out, it's just a site, and they see which one get the permission, and then they install it. It's a big telecom communicator developer.
Okay. Any other questions? No. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. So, colleagues, questions to officers. Who'd like to go first? Malcolm, do you want to go first?
Perhaps Mr. Taylor knows the answer. Is it that the council owns the freehold of this building, and so is the council letting this space to a telecoms company?
I honestly haven't the faintest idea. I didn't know until this evening that the council had
I
any
accept that the ownership
freehold.
of a property is not a relevant planning matter.
Yeah, I think there is this new, Mr. Akpata from the council told us that there is this new updated code into 2017 that allows the developer to overrule the landlord and say, if you need to install on your house, we're going to have to...
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to stop you because we've moved on to another part of the meeting. So, thank you. Mr. Taylor.
Yeah, well, I think I'd answered it. I mean, I think all I was going to say at the end was, I mean, whatever ownership in the freehold the council might have, clearly that's not relevant to the local planning authority decision that you're taking this evening.
Chairman, just one hand.
Maxwell, and then...
Thanks, Chair. Very minor question. The difference between what the application that got through an appeal and what's in front of us is that the antenna are slightly more vertical. I think that's pretty much it. What difference does that make? I'm guessing it gives it a better signal. But
I would imagine that it wouldn't be proposed unless it was providing a better signal.
Okay, so it's...
I mean, I think there's an operational advantage in them doing it. They wouldn't be doing it for aesthetic reasons. They're purely doing it for operational reasons. I wouldn't like to guess what that would be. I would imagine that the taller aerials do give a slightly better signal.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yeah, Chairman, I just want to make a comment about Councillor Spalding's comment that there's a national legislation called 2017 Digital Act, which would bypass the local planning and allow them to build antennas because of the 5G development. Sadly, the 5G development requires antennas every 400 meters, so as long as that's viable for them, they'll just apply. That's
What Councillor already said makes a lot of sense. Is the reason that this has therefore gone to committee is because this is a conservation area? Because, I mean, I get it as a councillor, I'm aware of antennae being, for example, on top of Trellick Tower. Every few months we get emails from the council saying we're going to change this and that and the other, but I've never seen a planning application, at least in my memory, in my ward. So I want to know why this is, if it's a national legislation governing this, why is it coming to committee?
Well, through you, Chairman, I mean, it's come to committee because there are 7 objections.
Okay.
So that's in accordance with the Constitution, that any more than 2 objections and it comes to committee. It doesn't come to committee because it's in a conservation area or a particular part of the borough. It comes to committee because there's more than 2 objections.
So antennae is generally not permitted development?
In fact, antennae in many situations can be permitted development. I think with 5G, we're actually seeing more applications coming to committee just because of the number of them and the fact that they tend to be in quite prominent positions. I think there's no doubt that 5G requires not just more aerials, but it requires them closer to the edges of buildings and with greater height and so on as well. Okay. So yes, we are getting more applications coming through to committee, I think, these days than we used to.
Makes sense. Thank you.
So I think we need to make a decision about this. I think to my mind, I know a lot of people view these aerials as being rather ugly additions to the top levels of buildings. However, in this particular case, having refused an application for something that had degree of similarity, it was allowed on appeal. And we know that national guidance makes it quite clear that this type of infrastructure in principle is supported. So I think that to my mind is where I come from on this. The recommendation in front of us is to grant planning permission with the conditions set out in the report. Can I see those in favour, please? Those against? Okay, so that's granted. by 4 votes to
Chairman,
1.
can I make a comment? Just for
No, sorry, you can't. Sorry, I'd like to move on, but that's so that's granted. But do you want to have your vote against? That's recorded in the minutes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So if we can now move on to the application in Paradise Walk, please, and I think that's going to be Katie Harrell to introduce. Katie.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Could we just get the slide? Thank you, Chairman. The application site is a 3-storey terrace property on Paradise Walk. The first part of the proposals involve the replacement of the external doors to the existing roof terrace to the front elevation of the property at roof level. So the existing drawing there on the left-hand side and the proposed on the right. The rest of the works all relate to the rear of the property. There's an existing lean-to at ground floor level adjacent to the boundary with number 7. I'll show you some photos of it in a second, but it's where my cursor is now. Under the proposals, this would be replaced with a new infill extension, just marked there with the red arrow. You'll have seen from the report at paragraph 6.2 that the proposal was amended during the course of the application. So the original proposals included an extension which extended much further rearwards, 0.9 metres, in fact further than the current proposals. As this section on the screen shows you, so again the existing on the left and the proposed on the right, the replacement extension now extends out to a depth comparable with that of the existing extension, so the depth is exactly the same. I've included these 2 photos to mainly to highlight the existing boundary wall between the application site number 6 and the neighbour at number 7. Again, under the original proposal, given the extension would extend further, it was proposed to increase the height of this section of wall by 1.48 metres. Again, under the new proposals, given the extension no longer goes further into the courtyard space, there's no change in the depth of the highest part of the wall. So you can see the existing on the left, proposed on the right. The highest part of this boundary wall remains at the same level. You can also see that I've just showed it in that yellow colour. The lower part of the wall is still proposed to be raised slightly, so that would now be 0.9 metres higher than the existing wall, rather than the 1.48 metres in the first set of plans. But just to be clear, that height is still proposed to increase. And then the last slide for you is just some photographs. They're in your pack as well. They are from the resident of number 7. I think they're quite helpful for showing the relationship between the 2 properties. The left-hand photo shows the courtyard area at number 7, and again you can see that low boundary wall. You can also see in the far left the existing extension with the lean-to and the glass roof on top. And then the middle photograph is from the kitchen window of number 7, and the far right-hand photograph again just shows you that lower section of the wall from the courtyard space at number 7. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Good. Thank you for that. Now I think we have an objector registered. Mr. Harding. Sir, where? Hello, hi. Yes, that's right.
Hello, my name is Tim Harding. My wife and I have been owners of number 7 Paradise Walk for 21 years, since 1997. Our objection relates to the proposed increase in heights of both parts of the party wall, and if necessary, to the fact that your report relies on measurements which are simply not correct. The 900 millimetre height increase which you have just mentioned is in fact 1.45 metres in the wall goes up to the height of the boundary wall with Tite Street. I wish to make 4 brief points. If the increases are carried out, it will result in our very small backyard potted plant garden being totally enclosed by walls over 9.3 9 foot 3 inches high, just under 2.8 metres. Currently, the quarter of the party wall has a 1.3 metre wall height, so that is going to be rise. This will significantly reduce the light to our kitchen windows, as well as creating a cannon-like light well with an unhealthy lack of air circulation. Two partial rights of light calculations have been provided by the applicant, which imply no significant loss of light. Had the methodology been used for walls built in front of windows, all our kitchen windows would have failed this test by a substantial margin, whereas at least one, probably two, doesn't now. Clause D of policy CL5 of the Council requires that there is no harmful increase in the sense of enclosure to existing buildings and spaces and neighbouring gardens. In this case, there plainly is. Every wall has been risen to 9.3 or more. Clause B refers to no further material worsening of sunlight daylight standards when they are already substandard. The application fails this too. It's quite clear that the application does not meet the requirements and guidance notes of policy CL5 on the grounds of enclosure, loss of light, air quality and general amenity, and not just by a small margin. At least 3 objectors I know concur with this view. 2, Jules Turner of the Chelsea Society and a planning representative for the Royal Hospital Ward, and Margaret Thompson for the Physic Triangle Residents Association wished to speak, but deferred to me in view of the 3-minute time limit. The increased heights of party walls, part of which is solely for increased privacy, do not justify the detrimental effect on our property, nor justify the contravention of the Council's own rules in policy CL5. So I urge you to turn down this application unanimously, as your colleagues in 2013 did further down the street for a very similar application. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very good. Thank you so much. Colleagues, any questions to Mr. Harding? I'd like to go. Malcolm, you go first.
Hello, Mr. Harding. We have to balance harm against improvement. And in the officer's report, they are telling us that contrary to, you've talked about an increase of enclosure, which is obvious because of the raised height of the walls. But in the report, the officers are saying the other side of that coin is an increase in privacy and a reduction in looking into other people's windows. So I just wondered, do you agree there's a kind of...
No, I do not at all. When these houses were built, which was prior to 1935, they were built in pairs with low garden walls in the yards, purely because there was a problem of light and air quality then. And the reason for it was the very high wall onto the Tite Street Gardens to the east. Over the years, in the year 2000, I had long discussions with my next door neighbour on rights of light, air quality and so on, which resulted that we had an agreement where they built the present party wall. It was subject to planning permission, which by the way they didn't get, but nevertheless it is up, and I can obviously live with that because it did not affect the bits where light really mattered to me. Privacy is absolutely minimal consideration in my mind. It is quality of the space behind there. All property developers are greedy, and they were in 1935, I'm sure too, and didn't want to build a high wall then. There is a very good reason why those walls were low, and I think they outweigh smells building up, airless things, not to mention exhausts from appliances of one sort or another. No, I think, I think it is a minimal objection, which I would certainly not go along with. Sorry for a rather long answer.
The officers also suggest in their report that the new roof, which will be glass, will be an enhancement and will preserve the conservation aspects. It's more traditional than what's there at the moment. Do you see an improvement in the roof?
I hopefully won't see it. Well, I will from high up, probably. I have 2 points to make on that. One is that if they raise the party wall to accommodate this new roof, it will, and have an upstand beam going across. I know this goes across rights of light, of party wall stuff. There will be a great deal more weight. It also, if I'm of suspicious mind, provides a beam that suggests they might at an opportune moment want to build a little bit more. And also that they have on their side of the wall, my house is lower than theirs, 2.7 metres at the moment, and when I was building housing in Scotland of a local authority, 2.6 metres floor-to-floor height was considered adequate. So I think they could build their new roof light. The present one leaks, I understand, so I have no objection to that within the height of the present wall. And I also have no objection to any of the other aspects in that the property is dilapidated. My neighbour tells me it leaks all over the place, and I am very happy that she has an upgraded property.
Any other questions? No. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. So our opportunity to ask officers. I would like to actually pursue the issue about the rear wall. Perhaps Mrs. Hurrell can go back to the photographs. There was quite a clear photograph of the. I think it's before that, perhaps. Yeah. Ah, yes. So on the right-hand image here, now that wall, I think if I've understood the report correctly, that wall is the one that's, at the moment, it's 1.3 metres high.
Correct.
Yes?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Okay. Now, my question is, under permitted development, that could be increased to 2 metres, is that right? Without it requiring any permission at all?
That's correct. Permitted development rights allow you to erect a boundary as long as it doesn't front onto a highway of up to 2 metres in height.
Right.
It goes up to 2.85.
Yeah, I'm sorry, sir, you can't sort of ask us questions now, so please we'll have to leave it. So permitted development would mean that the owner could increase the height of that, maybe putting a trellis or something up to 2 metres. However, I mean, the proposal in front of us has this wall being built up beyond 2 metres, which I'm not sure that really is something that I can understand the objection about a degree of sense of enclosure that it would create for the neighbour.
Yeah, so...
How would you respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So having a look at the scaled drawings that we have, which is where the measurements within the report have come from, and I have checked them today. So this is based on the scaled drawings we have. The existing wall, as we've heard, is 1.3 metres at that lower part, and it's shown to rise another 0.9 metres, taking it to 2.2 metres. So yes, 20 centimetres higher than would be allowed through permitted development rights. I think in terms of a sense of enclosure, I'll just talk you through 2 photos. So this far right-hand side photo, you can just about see the window, the kitchen window that we're referring to number 7. and if I flick through, and so these photos are probably the best to understand, particularly the right-hand two. So that's the existing outlook. Certainly, there will be a change in that outlook in that there would now be a much higher wall in front, in that view. So there certainly will be a noticeable difference. Officer's conclusion is that wouldn't be harmful, but of course that's for members to come to their own conclusion on based on the evidence before them.
I try and focus on this point. So the committee might decide that the difference between 2 metres and 2.2 metres was a small matter, and they were happy to go along with that. In other words, the application as it stands, prepared to support. On the other hand, they might appreciate the points that were made and say, well, actually, in fact, we can't take away permitted development rights, but we would nevertheless say that finding a mechanism in order to say, actually, 2.2 is not acceptable, but we would accept that permitted development might end up being 2. Now, is there a way in which we could do that without, because I think the idea of replacing the actual structure, which is already there, with something the same footprint, I think it'd be quite difficult to see how that might properly be refused, personally. What might be a mechanism that we could give effect to that if we went down that route?
If you were to go down that route and conclude that additional height at the boundary would have an unacceptable impact on Mr. Harding's living conditions, then given the description of development refers to the replacement of the lean-to and replacement windows, it doesn't specifically talk about the changes to the boundary, it's just sort of encompassed within it. I think I wouldn't want to recommend using a condition to try and remove the element. I think that goes beyond what the condition should do and would get quite tricky. But should you be so minded, I think you could probably delegate the authority back to us, if you were happy with all the rest of the proposals, to ask for an amendment to that boundary to remove that element from the proposals.
So, colleagues, I hope that trying to avoid this all getting very complicated, but from my discussion with Mrs. Harrell, I think essentially we're saying the application in front of us has that wall built up to 2.2 metres. So we might decide that we agreed with the recommendation, and that's actually fine. On the other hand, there is probably a mechanism for us to say that element of the proposal is not fine, and that would need to be removed, and the mechanism would be for us to say that part of it had to come back to officers, and we would delegate to officers that authority. Now, I don't know. I'm open to suggestions. I think, I don't feel very strongly about this personally, but how do you feel about all of this?
I think there's a difference between privacy and enclosure claustrophobia, and from the images it looks like this would create claustrophobia, and that's my main concern.
I think your proposal, Chair, is quite sensible in terms of mitigating the worst aspects of this, but still allowing something to happen. I think what you propose is quite reasonable in terms of delegation to officers.
Yeah, I agree, Chairman. Yeah.
Well, in that case, I'm going to go back to officers and just check, also Mr. Fletcher there, just what is the correct legal form then? It seems as though we're happy with the main aspects of the proposal, but this one issue that we've discussed is something that we're not happy with. How should we exactly give this effect as a resolution in front of us?
The resolution that I would suggest you would vote on would be to grant, subject to amendment to condition 2, which is our compliance with the approved drawings. Yes. And then you would delegate the authority to us to request an amended drawing from the applicant, and subject to us receiving that amended drawing without the increase in that height in the boundary wall, we would then issue a planning approval.
Right. Good. Okay. So hopefully we're now clear precisely. So the recommendation in front of us is to grant, but with what has been just said about condition 2, the approval of drawings. So can I see those in favour of that course of action? So that's granted, but on that basis. Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you. Good. Thank you. Can we now move back actually to the North Pack, and this is Lexington Gardens.
Thank you, Chairman. So just bring the slides up for you. So the first image to illustrate this proposal is the rear elevation of number 66 Lexington Gardens. You can see there that it's obviously covered in scaffolding. If you look at the lower part of the rear elevation, where you can see foliage above the brick boundary wall, that the part of the elevation that we're considering here is behind that foliage and behind that boundary wall, so it's not on the upper part, it's down near the bottom. That's just a closer in image. That's the existing rear elevation. So I think that the points to point out there are, you'll see the windows above the lower level extension. Those are the windows that we're considering in this application. In one of the representations, you'll see that there's a photograph taken looking up through the neighbour's sort of rear roof, a glass roof, and you can see that in this elevation towards the lower left-hand side of the image. You see it there in section. And that's the proposed rear elevation. So I'll just go back to the existing. If you look at those lower windows, you see that the proposal is essentially to add a pair of French doors in replacement of the window on the left-hand side, and then to put a single door and guardrail in place of the window on the right-hand side. And in plan form, that's basically a plan of both of the openings. And you can see there that although in the report both of them are described as Juliet balconies, I mean, technically they're Juliet balconies, but really they're little more than a guardrail just fitted across the window opening. That there's no balcony that one can actually go and stand on, as you can see there in that plan. And that was the last slide.
Okay. Well, thank you. Now, I think Mr. Tubb, yes, please. Thank you for waiting and bearing with us. So, you're a neighbour. Please, when you're ready, you go ahead and have up to 3 minutes.
Evening, councillors. My name is Jonathan Tobe. I'm here this evening on behalf of my mother, Susan Tobe, the owner and 20-year resident of the ground floor and basement flat of 64 Lexington Gardens. Susan is 76 years of age and is suffering from dementia, hence cannot appear herself. I also represent the other owners of that building and of 68 Lexington Gardens. I'm very frustrated to be here tonight, and yet again, not at least as I have flown down from Edinburgh to do so. I was last here on January the 7th, 2020, when under application 19-07195, the owners of 66 Lexington Gardens were attempting to gain the same double-door access to the basement extension paved roof, claiming the need for maintenance of the roof and to improve the natural light, as well as a Juliet balcony. Use of this roof as a terrace has been precluded since 2018, and the councillors last January, two of which are amongst you tonight in their wisdom, unanimously refused the application, going against the planning officer's recommendation, as they felt the proposed double doors would encourage access to the paved flat roof, resulting in harm to the neighbours' living condition in terms of increased noise and loss of privacy. So it's in complete shock and dismay that I find myself here again to object to a virtually identical application. I can only assume that the planning officer failed to read the previous application and decisions, which, given the fact that there are now have been 17 since 2018, are perhaps somewhat unsurprising, although not acceptable. Whilst I appreciate that applicants can apply as often as they like and that every application must be judged on its own merits, there must be a duty and a responsibility to consider all the previous applications when adjudicating this one, something that has obviously not been done in the planning officer's assessment. As argued and accepted previously, double-door access will encourage the contravention of the conditions on the use of this roof. The planning officer says as much in his report, but asserts that the existence of a planning condition and a metal balustrade of undetermined height is sufficient to deter people. I wholeheartedly disagree. I might agree if this rooftop was tiled and sloping, but given that it is flat and paved and numerous applications have sought to install double-door access, it's very clear to me what the intention here is. I've argued before that conditions are incredibly frustrating, costly and time-wasting to enforce for both neighbours and the council, and do not help the neighbour at 1 a.m. in the morning when the condition is being ignored, causing great distress, in this case to my 76-year-old mother. Current behaviour of our neighbours only reinforces such concerns. Even if you were not to agree with the interpretations, let's address Juliet balconies in isolation. I refer you to my letter of objection, which includes photographs of the proposed location. The officer asserts that Juliet balconies would have no greater an impact than existing sash windows and overlooking privacy and noise. How can putting in 3 large doors and metal railings to lean over not change in terms of privacy? This is just nonsensical. One of the proposed balconies is less than 1 metre away from my mum's bathroom window. Any loitering on the balcony, leaning, talking or smoking would literally see the smoke blow straight into a bathroom and bedroom. They would be looking directly through my mother's basement conservatory glass roof and on the other balcony peering directly into the neighbour's basement bedroom. How can this not have an impact on privacy and disturbance? The officer asserts that current proposals are modest when compared to those already granted. When does this stop? 5 approved and 10 rejected applications later, should we accept incremental modest gains from another 16 applications, which will result in quite major changes? This seems to have been the winning strategy of the applicants so far, given the unwillingness to consider past applications. There are many more inconsistencies in the planning officer's report, but time does not allow me to address them. I can mention them more should you grant me the time to do so. But the committee should be aware that there seems to be willing to accept incorrect drawings submitted by the applicants on which to base this approval. You will see the proposed back elevation schematic does not reflect the existing approval development conveniently.
I'm afraid time is pretty well up, so I need to stop you there. But thank you. There may well be questions. Colleagues, who would like to go first on this? Actually, I've got a question. Can we perhaps put up the drawings, Mr. Taylor? Because I just want to understand the proposed doors and Juliet balcony are actually they are at the same level as the roof terrace.
Absolutely.
Well, sorry, but the roof, I should, the top level. Is that correct? Is that your understanding?
Absolutely. You literally walk over that balustrade, which I have no idea what height that's going to be, and we'll be straight onto a flat roof, which is paved, not tiled, not sloping. It's a roof. It's all intents and purposes. It's a terrace, right. And all you would have to do is climb over a small balustrade to get there.
Now, okay, thank you for that. So that applies to the doors that are proposed as we're looking at the diagram on the left-hand side, but the other Juliet balcony is on the right. Now, is your understanding of that goes onto a flat roof as well?
That does not, no.
No, okay, so the one on the right is just a Juliet balcony. Okay, you have doors, but the one on the left, it goes onto a flat roof.
That's correct.
Right, okay. All right, well, thank you for clarifying that. Any other? Markham.
Mr. I completely got the point that if that roof terrace was used, people on it could look directly into a bathroom and a bedroom. And also I got the point in your objection that you were worried this would become a kind of short-term holiday let flat with a turnover of guests who wouldn't know the rules and would be tempted to use that as a roof terrace. So the railings there, do you think the railings are not high enough on the Juliet doors to stop people being tempted to get onto the terrace?
There's no stipulation in the planning at all in terms of what those height would be. The only stipulation about the balustrade is the fact that it's necessary to stop people falling out the window now you put doors in, which is a nonsensical argument if you ask me. No indication of height, but I would argue that anything up until 1 metre 1.5 metres, it could easily be surmountable by someone who wants to go onto that terrace. And by that time, you'll be essentially caging that window, caging that door. So what's the point?
Well, I mean, there is a drawing that does show the railings, and it's a scale drawing, proposed rear elevation, but you're saying the height of those railings in this application is not sufficient to stop people getting onto the terrace, and therefore, if there was an application that had high enough railings, that might remove your objection.
What height are we talking about here?
Sorry?
What height are we talking about? What would deter people from climbing over a balustrade?
I'm just reading from what you said, that you thought the railings were not specified in height and were not high enough.
Again, I don't know what height would deter someone from going out there. The fact is that it's precluded to go out there. I, for one, as a youth, would have been keen to use that roof terrace and be quite willing to jump over a fence to do so in my unruly youth. So I don't know what height would prevent that, but I would suggest that the height that I would be thinking of would actually end up a much less of an attractive option than just maintaining this as a window. I don't really understand what the benefit of turning this into a door and putting a railing and Juliet balcony there is, other than to encourage people to either go through that door or to lean over the railing. And as I explained, as you can see in the picture there, that is not anywhere near as recessed as the balconies further up the building. There's actually another three balconies on the building. But it is literally about a metre away from my mum's bathroom.
Yeah.
So if you're leaning out there having a fag, that smoke is just going to go straight into my mum's bathroom in a summer evening when her window's open. I don't see what benefit this gives to the development.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? No. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. So now we need to turn to offices. So, Mr. Taylor, maybe I'll start. I mean, a railing round a terrace is 1.1 metres, isn't it? Normally, isn't that a building regulations requirement? Whereas a Juliet balcony, what would apply to that?
Well, essentially, the building regulations are obviously designed to ensure the safety of people who use premises. So it's a minimum height. Under the building regulations, there would have to be a minimum height of 1,100 millimetres from finished floor level. That would apply to anything running around a roof. So if this was to become a roof terrace, it would need to have a railing running around it to prevent anyone falling off the side of it. Obviously, that's not proposed in the application, and it would require separate planning permission. The guardrail to the doors that is proposed in the application, that also would have to be a minimum of 1,100 millimetres, and it would also have to have vertical bars rather than horizontal bars, because obviously one can climb horizontal bars much more easily. So for that reason, the building regulations always require vertical bars as drawn in that elevation. The building regulations only require that to a height of 1,100. And clearly, a teenager could jump over 1,100, I suspect, quite easily. But yeah, I mean, that's the minimum requirement for the building regulations.
Can I ask, but just taking that a bit further, would it be possible to have, and this would be by way of condition, it would be the approved drawings, actually to say that we were going to require something that was higher than 1.1 metres? Would that be something that we could do if we wanted to?
Yes. Certainly a condition could require that the railings should be no less than 1.5 metres, for example.
Chair?
Sina, do you want to ask Mr. Taylor?
I wanted to come back on that point. If we condition to make the railings higher, that wouldn't be an enhancement. It would just make it look more ridiculous. I mean, the logic therefore would state, if our main concern is that people will jump over, is to to reject the application, because if we're conditioning ridiculously high railings in front of doors, it will look more unappealing.
I have to actually agree with Councillor Lowe, if I'm honest. I think it would look a bit strange.
Okay.
I think it serves the objection purpose anyway.
Sorry, Aaron, what did you say there?
Thinking that doesn't somehow manage the concerns raised by the objector, I believe, so I don't think it's even worth considering.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so just coming back to Mr. Taylor quickly, I think we've picked up, I think, extreme cynicism about, I mean, this, as has been said, there have been an enormous number of applications come forward at this property. I'm just wondering whether really, if there is anything that you feel we can do to address some of the concerns, while obviously we have to you know, we have to have proper decision making that is you know, takes account of only planning matters. I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions, really.
Unfortunately, I'm not sure that I do. I mean, I think clearly a roof terrace is totally unacceptable in principle. That's already been refused. This application is what it is. I mean, it's it would, if it was granted, it would include a condition again that the roof should not be used as a terrace, and clearly that condition would be enforced. I mean, if you don't have faith in such a condition, then you know, clearly the answer would be to refuse it. I mean, it would be the enforcement of the condition that would make the application acceptable.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so we need to make a decision. Yeah, I think the ability to enforce not creating a new roof terrace, I think is incredibly important. The difficulty is that the rear of these buildings are actually quite varied. So saying that from a design, from a conservation area point of view, the principle of having a Juliet balcony at various locations on the building is probably one that we simply have to accept. I think going down a route of saying that we refuse that on sort of design, but I'm not convinced that works. But what do you all feel? Just quickly going down the table, so to speak. What do you feel about this application? Where are you minded to go? Who'd like to go? Sina.
My main concern is, as the objector stated, people jumping over using it as a terrace, but I think conditioning an increase in height in the railings will not be an enhancement. So in planning terms, my personal view is to reject the application, because I'm not satisfied about the enforcement, given who's going to be using this apartment.
Well, Chairman, I mean, Juliet balcony is basically not a terrace where you can actually... It's sort of a convenience rather than an actual space to be used. So it's a tough one to make a decision, really. But that's just a comment.
You've got to consider every application individually, and in this case, there's obviously a flat roof there, which people could abuse potentially and use as a terrace when they shouldn't. So, in looking at this individually, I think that it's too grey and we should refuse.
I'm struggling with the difference between the two windows. The right-hand one is a Juliet. The right-hand one is a Juliet balcony, and presumably that door is openable for ventilation. So it's like a full-length window. So you could apply that argument to the left-hand double Juliet windows. I mean, it would make it much easier in my mind if they were sort of normal windows and cut in two halves. And then you could make just the upper halves openable and the bottom halves would be unopenable and would have Juliet railings. But that's not what is before us. So why has the applicant put fully openable doors behind the railings on the left? Why would he want to do that? Or the applicant, why would the applicant want to do that? I can't see, other than getting access to the roof terrace, why this proposal has been given to us. But of course, it's not a planning consideration to imagine the future use of something which might not be allowed. We're not allowed to use that as a material consideration. So I'm just very stuck with this.
Okay, well, I think what we should do is we should take a vote and see where we go. So can I ask, the recommendation obviously is to grant with the conditions attached. Can I see those in favour, please? Can I see those against? So that's, the application is refused. I abstained, incidentally. So that's 3, 1, 1, if you see what I mean. Now we need to think about what a reason for refusal would be. And I'm going to ask Mr. Taylor if he can assist us here in this. What do you feel?
Well, I think, Chairman, the reason for refusal would be that the set of French doors would make it likely. It wouldn't make it certain, but it would make it likely that the rear roof could be used as an amenity space or terrace.
And I think
actually, I'd change the wording.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just as I'm thinking aloud, I'd change the wording to would increase the likelihood.
Yes. Okay.
Because obviously it's possible to climb out through a window in the present situation.
That's true, isn't it?
I'm very sorry to interrupt.
It would be to increase the likelihood of it being used as an amenity space.
Yeah, and I think I'm flowing on from that. There would be a very obvious amenity issue, which would be covered by CL5, and it's a very clear cut why it would be unacceptable to have a terrace at that level. So I think that's straightforward. Who would like to propose that? Councillor Lowry, who would like to second? Councillor Maxwell, I beg your pardon. Councillor Woodger is seconds. So can I see those in favour of that resolution to refuse on that basis? Okay. Are those against? Okay. So that resolution to refuse for that reason is approved by 4 votes to 1. Okay. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Committee.
Thank you. Okay. We're now going to move on to consider Chatsworth Court, and I'm going to ask.
Chairman, can we have a break, please?
Yeah. Let's have a break of just a couple of minutes, and then when we come back, Councillor Spalding will take the chair.
If everybody's back, then we'll go on to number 8, flat 193 Chatsworth Court, and this is going to be presented by Mr. Taylor. Yeah, thank you.
It is indeed. So as usual, I'll just show you some images to illustrate it. The planning permission is sought in this case for the replacement of existing windows with French doors to provide access to the exterior. The image that you're looking at the moment, the photograph, obviously shows the elevation of Chatsworth Court. If you look right at the bottom of the elevation, at the end of the path that you see in front of you, you'll see that there's a sunken light well area separating the main gardens from Chatsworth Court behind. And that's where the window would change to doors. So in other words, the main elevation that you see here in the photograph simply wouldn't change. So in this perspective, it would be exactly as it is there. Move closer to it, and you can see there a little bit more of the well area separating the elevation from the gardens. You'll see there that there's a light inside, and you can see it at the bottom of the steps. There's a door that's open already. That's an existing door to the right-hand side. And that's a view looking along towards the right-hand side of the lower part of the elevation. And then to the left, that's what you see there. If you look at the bay window, to the left-hand side of the existing single door, the bay window is where the French doors would be inserted. And in drawing form, you see there at the centre of the image, on the upper part of it, the existing window in the bay, and the lower image shows you the French doors inserted at the bottom of the bay. So that's the bay in photograph, and then that's the bay in elevation. And that's the presentation, Chairman.
Thank you. Then we have one objector, and the applicant is here. So they will have 3 minutes each. I'm not sure if I should time this, or somebody else could tell me when 3 minutes is up. So Mr. North will go first as the objector, and then Mr. Botsford as the applicant. Is Mr. Botsford here? Yeah, good. Okay, when you're ready then, Mr. North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Lloyd North. I am an owner and a resident of Chatsworth Court and have been living in the building for more than 20 years. However, I'm not here as a resident. I'm actually here as a director of the freehold company, and I should explain that the Chatsworth Court Freehold Company Limited is made up of the resident leaseholders of the building. It is not owned by a company. We enfranchised and, in effect, are a co-op that purchased our freehold in 2006. Chatsworth Court is a 1930s mansion block of architectural merit and historical importance. It is part of the, is going to be part of the Esser Conservation Area, which is currently under review by the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. We had hoped that will be completed by now. This application seems to have been slipped in before the completion of that process. We also note that Esser, which is the Conservation Area charity, has objected to this application. (193) was originally the kitchens to Chatsworth Court, which were serviced apartments in the 1930s. Since the 1970s, they've all been individual apartments. This apartment never did have French doors going onto the communal gardens. We have pointed out to the Council a major concern that the residents of Chatsworth Court have not been written to. There are 200 flats in the Chatsworth Court estate. I've got 2 flats in the block and I didn't get any letter, and my understanding is that almost no other residents got letters, and many were dismayed to hear about this planning application that had gone through. I might also say that the leaseholder for flat 193 only made an application to the landlord, the freehold company, after making this application to the council. That has been carefully considered by the board of directors and the managing agents as trustees, and has been refused permission as a licence to alter, and the leaseholder has been contacted, so he is aware that his application to alter has been refused by the freeholder. Chatsworth Court lease is a party to all the leaseholders and the freeholder, and it precludes any penetrations of the brickwork as a condition of the lease. This application will clearly breach the lease, and the Freehold Board have approved a licence to alter for substantial internal works within the lease, which has caused considerable disturbance for most of this year for the neighbours above and either side. This previous permission was granted out to carry out works only to refurbish the inside of the apartment.
5 seconds.
And so we would please ask that the council please reject this application.
Thank you, Mr. North. Then exactly the same time goes to the applicant. Mr. Botsford, is it your flat or are you the agent? Or?
I'm the agent, but also the owner and the applicant.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. First of all, good evening, Chairman and members of the Planning Committee. What I'm holding in front of me is a letter I downloaded from the RBKC planning website. It's a letter from Chatsworth Court Freehold Company to the council. It's dated 2012, but it's for an application that was granted to create a new flat in the basement. It's signed by Chris Ashcroft, and the directors on here include Lloyd North, who's just objected to it. It was obviously all right for the Freehold Company at that time to apply for themselves to create a flat in the basement. That flat has a number of new French doors on it, quite a change in approach since then. Obviously, what I would say is a number of the objections, and I think there have been a dozen, but a number of them are linked, either by the directors putting in application objections on their own merit or on behalf of the Chatsworth Court Freehold Company, and I understand Lloyd is also linked to ESSA. What I would say is 3 of the objections contain the same common error, that the flat I own used to be the kitchens. A small part of the flat was the kitchens. The rest of it, the 1 bedroom and the sitting room, main living room, were actually part of the main Chatsworth Court restaurant, and obviously did have access through the French doors in the adjacent flat. But when the restaurant was turned into flats, that access was cut off. But that was a long time ago. That was 1960. I'm really making the point that a number of objections have got that same error in them. The objections are linked, or a number of them are. Can I make one other further point? I was encouraged to make this application following the flooding of my flat and a number of others in the lower ground on the 12th of July. On the 5th of October, so just over a month, well, just on a month ago, the building flooded again. Fortunately, it didn't get as far down the corridor to my flat, but the likelihood is we can expect more floods in the coming years. Even if COP26 does everything it should do, I don't think it's going to have the impact on stopping floods in my flat. Thank you.
You have another couple of minutes if you want them, but I expect my colleagues will ask you questions. So I turn to the colleagues, and I wonder if there are any questions for the objector or the applicant.
Mr. North, hi. In the evaluation in the officer's report, it says that there are other examples of French doors nearby. Can you comment on that? I mean, it's noted in the freeholder's objection that you're trying to maintain the integrity of the original design of the Art Deco building. So what are these other French doors nearby that are being referred to?
Yes, the original layout for the west garden, which you saw from there, there are up from the ground floor to the 5th floor of residence apartments overlooking the residential garden, which is for communal use and quiet enjoyment. it is almost like a sound complex just there. Originally it was the terrace extended off the restaurant. The restaurant closed in 1959-1960 when all the basement areas were converted into flats and storage areas. Flat 198 never had French doors. The only French doors that are there were from the original restaurant. So what we're keen to do is to preserve the Art Deco heritage of the building as it was. Plus the neighbours that look onto this area of the garden were quite dismayed that they weren't contacted and told about this. And it's very important because the sound in this area reverberates. It's one thing to have a set of double doors. It's another thing to have two sets of double doors. To have three sets of double doors going onto the same terrace means that that won't be for the quiet enjoyment of the neighbours. It will just be for a personal extension to flat 193.
So just to clarify, that there have been no other applications approved for French doors?
No, I can clarify this for you. There were two applications. I've been on the board of directors since 2004 and we're in franchise in 2006. There have been two previous applications for licenses to alter. That was from flat 25 and flat 190. One is on the ground floor, one is on the basement level. Both of those were refused. The flat 198 that was created some years ago, which was referred to, does not go onto communal areas, and we're quite keen because if you can imagine, there'd be about 30 flats that would want to apply to put doors onto the communal areas, which would affect the whole building, because we have main doors that go through a security set of stairways that are lockable that go onto the communal area. And the other point I'd make is there are plenty of alternative exit routes from the flats in that basement. There is three sets of stairways at the east, the west and in the centre, and of course if there was a flood you could easily climb out the window onto the floor because it's ground floor level or basement level.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Mr. North. Actually, no, it's not. It's just the applicant. Sorry, which is the application was rejected by the freeholder. So why are you applying for planning permission for this change?
The initial application has been turned down by the freeholder. The lease actually says it can't be unreasonably approval can't be unreasonably withheld. So I intend to go back to the freehold. If I'm granted planning permission, then I will go back to the freehold company. I obviously can't do anything without their permission, but I will take it further. There was no point battling against the first refusal if I didn't have planning permission.
And then to sort of follow up, Mr. North mentioned consultation or a lack of consultation. What consultation have you done with all the residents in the court?
I did the statutory informing the freehold company that I was making an application prior to making the application, and that's set out in the application. But no, I haven't canvassed all of the flats in the block. Only a certain number of flats are directly linked to this. Most flats can't actually see that area.
Why didn't you contact all the flats?
I didn't think it was necessary or relevant.
Right, okay.
Thank you, Chairman. The question to Mr. North. You just answered Councillor Lowry's question about French doors not overlooking the communal garden. So let's say if any other flat that's not overlooking the communal garden, let's say on the side or somewhere, applied for French doors, as a director, as a freehold agent, would you be happy for that on a personal level to grant or accept?
Well, speaking on a personal level, I do object because I'm one of the flats that looks onto the garden, and actually 1/3 of the block look onto this garden, another third look onto the east garden. It's in the shape of an E if you're looking at it from above, and the remaining third are over the front of the building or to the sides. The only previous application that was granted was at the front of the building, and that was onto a light well. It wasn't onto the communal garden, so it was private to that light well. This is very different. This is 3 sets of double doors opening onto a communal garden that is overlooked by everybody that overlooks that garden. And as you saw from the pictures, if you can imagine like a horseshoe shape, there is, let's say, about 15 per floor, and it goes up from ground to 5th floor. This is on the basement level, so above it you've got the ground floor level, which is level with the garden, and then the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 above that. So it's a considerable amount of properties will overlook this development.
Thank you. My question is, if there's a flat that's not being overlooked from the communal garden, I don't know if your structure doesn't have that thing, but if there's a, I don't know, if the same flat on the light well where you just mentioned reapplied for a French door, would you be happy on a personal level, or as an agent of the freehold?
Okay, as a personal level, I put that to one side, but as a director of the freehold company, we have a duty under the lease to uphold the lease, and the lease specifically stops anyone from making protrusions into the brickwork. You cannot knock holes into the brickwork of the building, because flat 193, with respect, is a leaseholder. He may well want to short let it, he may want to sell it on, but he doesn't have the right to destroy the Art Deco integrity of the building without the permission of the freeholder, and that's been refused. And even if it was accepted tonight it would be refused by the board of directors. It's not something we have a choice on. We have a duty to uphold the lease, and the lease prohibits us from allowing that, because otherwise every flat on the ground floor and the basement level will be putting applications in to put doors onto the gardens, and that would be just a free-for-all.
Thank you.
I've got a question for each of you. Mr. North, do all the residents have access equally to all the gardens at the moment?
The answer to that is yes. All the residents have access to the communal areas, which includes the front forecourt, the east garden, the west garden, and the planted areas around. We do have a lot of security involved in that to access the gardens, you either have to come through the main staircase that is covered by CCTV and locks, or you have to go through the lockable gate. But it's a security issue that, yes, they do have communal access to all the ground. It's shared by all the residents, and it's something that the residents actually value very much.
And does that include the sunken area?
Yes, that is communal garden space, yes.
So anybody could use that sunken area?
Any of the residents could pass through it or use it during the summer weather, yes.
And second question to Mr. North, are there any other flats on the ground or lower ground floor who do have French windows, who have direct access into the gardens?
The only one is the flat next door, which was, as it was originally designed, it was originally the restaurant, so it did have access, but we've not granted any other license to alter. As I say, there were two further applications, flat 25 and flat 190, and they were refused on the same grounds as this one.
So one has been granted subsequent to the original design of the building, but are there any original French windows for ground or lower ground flats in the original design that had access to the communal gardens?
No, there hasn't. The only one was the flat next door, and that was because it was the restaurant. All the rest, we've refused any applications.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And then to Mr. Botsford, I think, is it true that you have an alternative means of escape if there was a flood, other than having to have French windows put into these walls?
In the 12th of July flood, the water came in through the front door. If I was trying to escape, I wouldn't want to be trying to escape in the direction the water's coming from. I would not want to be going away from it. So the only alternative is to climb out over the windows, but they've got quite high window sills.
And if the flood was significant, how would you open the windows? Because they open outwards.
So if the flood was significant and in the existing arrangement...
Well, if the lower basement level flooded and you wanted to use the windows to get out, in your plans...
I put them open...
Well, actually the windows open inwards.
Yeah.
So you said the flooding came through the front door into the flat.
That's how it got into the flat. It was also raising up outside in the that paved area.
Yeah.
I have photos of it about 8 inches deep there.
And then finally, I think you realise that ownership and licences and everything else are not something the planning committee looks at. We just look at the architecture of it and the effect on the rest of the building and residents' amenity. So any sort of private arrangements are between the freeholder and the leaseholder, are not planning matters at all.
Totally understand.
So we won't listen to any of that. I think those are all my questions. So at that stage, we're going to move to questions from the committee to the officers. So your part finishes there. So colleagues, do you have any final questions to the officers? No? Arian?
My sort of question, I guess, is how common is this type of application? I mean, in terms of someone applying for planning permission when the freeholders essentially said no. Is that quite common? Is that unusual?
Yes, that's quite common. I mean, planning permission is merely permissive under the Town and Country Planning Act. Quite commonly, I mean, freeholders or other people with an ownership stake in a property can block something or prevent it happening. I mean, permitting something under the Town and Country Planning Act is just that. Often, lots of planning permissions are not implemented for one reason or another.
Then my second question is, this isn't a listed building, but it is obviously historic Art Deco. Do we attach any sort of relevance to that, any sort of protection?
I mean, I think it's a very attractive building. But, I mean, the next point to make would be when one looks at the elevation, as you see there, the proposed doors wouldn't even come into that photograph. So the attractive elevation would remain exactly as you see it there. I mean, in town planning terms, the alteration down there at the well level, beneath the garden level, is not that significant in town planning terms. That the building would maintain its attractive appearance as it has at the moment. And it's not a listed building, so the removal of the fabric down there isn't a planning concern.
And then in terms of the previous applications on this property which have been refused, can we take those into account in terms of, it's unusual that they get permitted when they come to this committee. Is that a consideration?
I'm not aware of planning applications being refused. I think the discussion was talking about the freeholders refusing proposals to insert doors. I mean, there's no planning history along here.
And if we were minded to grant this, and the freeholder still said no, what happens? They still can't do it. Or it's not in our domain. I'm just curious.
Yeah, but the freeholders obviously have that right.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I've got a couple of questions. It is a very fine building and of a very distinctive Art Deco style. And is there any way, if we did grant this, we're interested in preserving the architecture, that we can sort of condition that any French windows and so on must match the existing ones exactly, or must the materials and the design must match the existing?
Except there aren't any existing. I don't know what they'd match.
There are French windows on that other side, yeah. I think there's single one. Oh, there is a double one.
Yeah, there's a single door, then there's a set of French doors.
If you look at the elevation,
I can't tell from this photograph how copying those doors may be a good idea or a bad idea. I just can't see them closely enough.
I was looking at the green roof elevations with the red box. I think you've got a slide. I mean, there is a double French window there and a single existing.
I mean, I think that the way around that would be, I mean, working at that scale, it's just not that easy to anticipate the precise sort of dimensions of glazing bars and so on. I mean, the way to safeguard that would be to add as a reserved matter if you were granting permission, for example, a 1 to 10 detail of the glazing bars and so on, just to make sure that they matched others.
I was looking at condition 3 and 4, and condition 3 says materials to match the existing, but condition 4 on the doors just talks about white painted and so maintained. And I just wondered if there's any merit in adding the same phrase to match existing. Depends how strong the word match. It doesn't say match exactly.
I mean, matching the existing materials is one thing, but I think what you're really talking about here is the detail of the proposed doors in terms of their glazing bars and so on. I mean, doors are different to windows. It may not be possible to have precisely the same dimensions, for example, for the outer frame of a door as you might do for a window.
Why I raised this, I was looking at Mr. North's letter that says Chatsworth Court has been trying to retain and enhance the original features, especially if it does become conserved. One phrase there is like-for-like window designs. So I just wonder if we can boost condition 4 a bit.
Well, I think that, as you can see from the elevation on the screen, at this scale, the detail is like for like. But I'm suggesting if you really want to be certain of that, the best thing to do is to require a more detailed scale. At this scale, on that elevation, it looks like for like. But I think 1 to 10 details of the framing and glazing bars would make certain of that.
I don't know what colleagues think of that we ask officers to approve the final detailed design of the doors, if we were minded to grant it.
What,
If we were minded to grant,
yeah.
So we might not grant.
Yeah.
Chairman, just a question to Mr. Derrick. Could we restrict, because they're looking for 3 French windows, can we, I don't know, maybe restrict to 1 or 2? Is that? You can't.
My personal view is to refuse on architectural grounds. I don't think it would respect the integrity and nature of the building. And I think that's consistent with there being no other French doors, apart from that unique exception of there having been a restaurant in 1959 which was shut. So I think we can refuse this on grounds of respecting the consistency of the original architecture. Does that make sense? Or?
Except your comment that there are no French doors, but clearly they are.
Yeah, but I think Mr. North explained that was an exception because that used to be a restaurant, and when the restaurant shut, they didn't change it back, but that was a unique scenario.
That's not being overlooked from the communal garden. That's my question to Mr. North. Because that specific one is not, let's say someone in the communal garden cannot look onto the French windows because that's on the side, I believe so. So, in a way, it's not syncing with the existing architecture of the building.
I think it's fairly marginal, to be honest. It'd be a shame to damage the Art Deco building. I don't think that adds anything to it, and it's relative harm. It's fairly minor, but it is probably relative harm, so I'd be minded to refuse.
Just want to make another point. I would like to abstain my judgment, but it would have been one door, which would be looking at like the restaurant, not 3 doors. I would have been.
So you're thinking you might have
Yes, yeah.
Shall we move to our vote then? The officers recommend that it should be granted. So we'll first of all see those who are in favour of granting. All right, then we'll see those who are against and those who wish to abstain.
Abstain.
So that's 2 against, 1 for, 1 abstaining. So the planning permission is refused. Now you have to have a reason.
CL8, we can say that the proposals would not be sympathetic to the original design of the building. Would that work, Chairman?
Mr. Taylor?
Well, look, it wouldn't be CL8 because that CL8 is a roofline policy, but I think you probably mean CL1.
CL1, okay.
You're happy, so that's your reason. CL1 doesn't respect the original architectural design of this building, and you're seconding. So it's proposed by Councillor Lowry, seconded by Councillor Woodger. Okay, that concludes that case then. Thank you. Planning permission is refused.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. So can we now move on to consider the application at 24 Pembridge Crescent, please? And that's Derek, you again.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application to add roof pitches front and rear to actually form a terrace in the middle of the upper roof. Just before I start to show some images, you should see in the addendum report before you that there was a late letter from Sabina Rast-Burkhalter, which you should have before you in the addendum report. That contains obviously the letter itself plus some photographs. Right, and then to illustrate the proposal, the application property is at the centre of the aerial image that you see there. You can see that the roof line or the roof forms along this side of Pembridge Crescent are actually quite varied. In fact, every property along here has a slightly different roof form to every other, which I think is quite an important part of the context for this. That's the existing rear elevation. And you'll see the application property at the centre. You'll see that obviously the roof forms differ from one property to another. You'll see in this image the proposed rear elevation. So that's the existing and that's the proposed. So what's changing there is that the existing flat roof is being replaced by 2 pitches, one at the front and one at the back. And then in section, you can see a roof terrace hidden in between the 2 pitches. So normally with a mansard roof, there'd be a sort of a lower pitch and an upper pitch, and then either a flat section or a central ridge. In this case, that they would cut out that central part to install a terrace at the centre part of the roof, as you see there in the section. And so I think that image is just quite useful to show the relationship between the proposed terrace and the application building and the neighbouring buildings. If you look at that image, you'll see the porthole window, which you'll have seen referred to in the report and in representations. You can see the porthole window, which is actually the window to flat 7 next door in that image, just to the left of the application property. And that's a view taken from flat 7 looking through the porthole window. What you can see there is the flank wall of the application property in the background, taken through the porthole. That's the same photograph, actually, that you'll see in Sabina Rest-Burkhalter's letter that you have. And that's the last image.
Now, I don't think the objector is actually present. I've got Sabina Rest-Burkhalter, but I...
No, she couldn't make.
Oh, I see. She not. Okay. Well, in that case, we move swiftly on. Colleagues, questions for Mr. Taylor about this? Mark.
This porthole window, this thing I focused on, the objector, whose window it is, says it's a significant diminution of daylight, which we have to consider. I just wonder what the sort of severity of that is. What I'm trying to get a measure of it. You know, is there a level threshold beyond which we would say that's definitely triggered a harm, or is it a sliding scale, or is this beneath the sort of trigger level?
Well, this is actually beneath the trigger level. I mean, I'll use the word material rather than trigger level because that's the word in the daylight guidelines. Essentially, the British Research Establishment guidelines set 20% as the threshold beyond which an impact would become material. The guidelines don't suggest that planning permission should immediately be refused if something goes above the 20%, but above 20% is regarded as generally material. In this case, if you use I mean, they submitted a daylight study with the application, and the porthole window is taken into account in the daylight study. If you use the vertical sky component measure, then the vertical sky component loss would be 18%. So that's getting close to the 20, but still within the tolerance of the guidelines. If you use the no skyline and daylight distribution measures, then actually the effect is even less than that. So the worst case scenario using the vertical sky component measure is 18%. And then the daylight distribution takes into account the floor space and the size of the room, and that's less than that. The other aspect of policy CL5 is sense of enclosure, which isn't a mathematical measure, but that's obviously relevant to this as well.
And then, Chairman, if I just to follow that up very briefly, does it make any difference if this reduction or this harm relates to what is a bedroom stroke study as opposed to a sort of habitable daytime living room?
Well, it is a habitable room. I mean, it's a bedroom and it's a study, and that's definitely a habitable room. I mean, the guidelines do give greater emphasis to living rooms as opposed to bedrooms or studies, but it's certainly a habitable room. I mean, I'd never suggest otherwise.
I mean, I suppose any development that puts a new structure into space is going to, you know, take some light from something somewhere. And so any development is going to take some light from somewhere. And we're just here to sort of judge the severity of it. So thank you.
Any other points or anyone? No. Okay. Well, in that case, I think we can probably look to make a decision. The officer recommendation here is to grant with the conditions attached. Can I see those in favour of the recommendation, please? So that's granted. Thank you. Now, if we can now stay in the North Pack and consider the application Latimer Academy at Freston Road. So, Mr. Taylor.
This application is to retain an existing porter-cabin building in the grounds of the Academy. In the first slide there, you'll see it's probably a little bit faint at that distance, but it's the red dotted outline that you see at the bottom of the image. It's clearer there, so you can see the existing porter cabin to be retained in the lower part of the image, and you can see there it's set within an open courtyard at the side of the college, and that shows you the porter cabin. It's got roof lights in the pitched roof, and it's set down in the side courtyard, and that's what it's like from ground level. So it's an application to retain the existing building that you see there in the photograph.
Any questions about this? It comes before us because it's actually council-owned property. Okay, so the recommendation is that we grant permission for this. Can I see those in favour, please? So that's granted. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. If we can now move to the South Pack, and we will turn to the Planning Permission and Listed Building application for Princess Gate property.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of slides to show you. The first on the screen there is just an aerial view of the property. So as you've just said, it's a listed building in residential use, 5 stories high. You can see the large flat roof area, and you can hopefully just make out where my cursor is. There's an existing lift shaft in the middle section of that roof. Planning permission is sought for the installation of 3 AC units, which would be located adjacent to this lift shaft. You can see them marked with the arrow there. That's the proposal in plan form. And then the last slide just shows you them in elevation, just to show how they'd be tucked up next to that lift shaft. And that's the proposal.
Okay, thank you. There are no speakers. Any questions about that? I mean, I think from the representations, it seems as though there's an enormous amount of work has been going on this very substantial building for a long time.
That's right. There's been a lot of internal reconfiguration and movement around of the property. So it sounds as though the objectives have had to deal with quite a prolonged a period of time with building works, and a lot of them refer to the fact that they're feeling a little bit perhaps fed up of it. But I think my only comment on that is the installation of 3 units on the roof should be fairly minimal in terms of any disruption that they would experience.
And we have put on our standard conditions relating to aircon units, haven't we? So that they are attached.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. So colleagues, recommendation for the planning permission first is that we grant with the conditions attached. Can I see those in favour, please? So that's granted. And we also have the listed building consent, because it's a listed building. Can I see those in favour of granting that? So that's granted as well. Thank you very much. If we can now turn to the application by the Royal Marsden, and Katie, that's you again, isn't it?
Thank you very much. The application site is part of the Royal Marsden Hospital site. It's an area largely used as a car park. I sort of rather crudely there outlined it on the aerial shot there with the red line, so you can be familiar with the area of the hospital we were talking about. You'll note that there's residential properties adjacent to the site on Guthrie Street, underneath that red line, and then the residential properties opposite on Stewart's Grove that back on to that road. So the proposal features 3 elements. There'd be a new cycle store in place of an existing bicycle shelter. That's the middle of the red squares on that image. There'd be a new canopy to provide some cover for staff. That's the far left red square in the image. And then the final part of the proposal is the relocation of a skip to the location on the far right there with the third red box, and this skip would be enclosed by a new artificially foliaged, if that's a word, screen. The next slide, again, I've included an aerial photograph because I do think it's helpful just to get our bearings in terms of the residential properties around. The top box and arrow, that's the location of the skip enclosure. So you can see there it would be located next to the blank flank wall of the end terrace property on Guthrie Street. The middle box and arrow, that refers to the location of the new the new bicycle store, and then the last bottom arrow, that's the location of the new canopy. Very briefly, there's a few more details on the next slide of each of those three elements. So this is the cycle shelter. You can see the photograph on the bottom there shows you the existing shelter that houses 20 bicycle stands. The proposed structure is larger. It measures 2.7 metres in height and would be substantially larger to accommodate 50 secure cycle spaces for staff. This slide just shows you a little bit more detail about the canopy I mentioned. So it would be a timber frame structure, open underneath with a roof on top. You'll note that one of the conditions listed in the recommended report suggests that this should be a glazed roof. And then lastly, this slide just shows you a bit more details about that enclosure that I referred to for the proposed new location of the skip. So say it's on three sides and it would be covered by artificial planting. My last slide in the presentation is just this one there on the screen. These photos are also in the pack. They've been provided by one of the objectors, but I think it gives a useful oversight of the existing car park area and the existing buildings, structures and cars that are found there at present. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Mr. Farlow, hello. Now, you're a neighbour. Thank you very much indeed for waiting and sitting through our various deliberations. Thank you very much, though, for coming. So, when you're ready, please, you have up to 3 minutes to go ahead and present your objection. Please.
Thank you very much for including us on the agenda this evening. I'm here representing the local residents association. We have over 100 members, and I was nominated to represent the views of our over 20 neighbours who objected. We are proud to have the Marsden as a neighbour, as an international renowned hospital, and we work closely with them over the last year, and Chris especially, to help on our Good Neighbour initiative, where we address issues such as commercial deliveries well before 8 a.m, before 6 a.m. even, illegal parking by their contractors, noisy works, and we continue to work with them on issues such as delivery lorries reversing all the way down Stewart's Grove, and a long list of planning issues where the Marsden has not followed planning processes that's too long for me to list in my 3 minutes. First of all, the bicycle parking. I bicycled here tonight. We do not object to the bicycle parking. We are concerned though about a large wooden structure, including more of the car park, especially when the Marsden leadership told us it would be great for neatly storing building materials, and also given the fact that Marsden has a history of not applying for permission for change of use. For example, there is a nearby residential building they converted into office in the last year. We would love to suggest that a condition is put on that only be used for bicycle storage, and Chris and I have discussed this recently and they appear amenable to that. If that's the purpose, let's keep it to that. Additionally, we're a bit bemused by why such an expensive building, costing hundreds of thousands of pounds, is used to protect the bicycles, which we appreciate, but we're concerned that this is just creating more enclosure that will be used to justify a bigger footprint building in one that we understand they plan to construct in this car park. If I move secondly to the skip in the car park, we object to the skip and enclosure being placed at the current outside welfare area for the Marsden staff. Did the application mention this space is currently fenced off and reserved as outdoor seating for the Marsden staff? It is important to note the skip has already been relocated. The compressor was in place around the time the application was filed, and the skip has been not there. It has been at the front of the building during that time. This should be an example of the residents working well with the Marsden, because we suggested they use the space beside the commercial loading dock where the skip is at the minute and trial for it. The report acknowledges it's awkward for the contractor, but doesn't mention any safety issues with that. And we appreciate it's awkward, but also acknowledging the fact that placing it in the car park also brings costs, the sacrifice of the area, more reversing of lorries down the down the narrow single lane Stewart's Grove. So we propose that the trial not be of the new space, but continue to be in the existing location, and they continue to work on overcoming the challenges, and we've made a list of improvements to that area to help with those challenges that's too long to consider at this point in my 3 minutes. If it is insisting to move to the car park, we suggest collections are only allowed between 8 and 5, which are the Marsden allocated times, and it's on their gates, that's the times the gates are open to deliver, not the extended times the report suggests. We suggest there's a traffic plan that includes no vehicles are allowed to reverse onto site. We suggest the skip is closed rather than open, and the enclosure screened by real plants, not plastic ones that will quickly become an eyesore as they weather and turn blue. Thirdly and finally, we think an awning for staff waiting outside is very sensible for COVID testing. Who could object to that? However, no staff have been waiting outside for testing in the last 9 months. This is currently not happening. We propose they test a temporary awning for the staff if they do plan to use that area for outside testing, and if the budget is tight, the local resident association is happy to fund the purchase of a temporary awning if that is something they want to do.
I'm going to have to ask you to conclude at that point.
Therefore, we propose limiting the use of the wooden building to bicycle storage only, trialling at the front, continue trial at the front gate, and trialling a temporary awning rather than a permanent one to enclose the space.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Mr. Jackson, actually, you have a little bit over 3 minutes there, but please go ahead when you're ready.
That's very kind, thank you. I'm Chris Jackson. I'm the head of facilities at the Royal Marsden. My role is around site management and some of the logistical issues that we face as a trust. As you're well aware, and as David alluded to, we're proud to be a world-leading hospital in cancer treatment, ranked 4th in the world with the largest and most comprehensive service in Europe, treating 60,000 patients a year, and with that comes a very extensive operation that sits behind that. We've been in Chelsea since 1851, committed to remaining in the area, demonstrated by our investment in the site and improvements exceeding over 100 million in the last 10 years. And we've articulated that in previous responses to the council when considering the Brompton's plans as well. We are pressed with managing an operation that is complicated and intense, as you're all aware from the recent COVID pandemic, which continues on. We have a battle to recover our services and provide as much cancer care as we possibly can to the wider NHS service in the locality and beyond that. But this comes with the very topical challenge of delivering those ambitions in an environmental and safe way. And this application seeks to address some of those issues. Firstly, to continue to segregate our waste streams to increase the recycling. That's the purpose of the skip, the enclosed skip that we're proposing. And secondly, to encourage greener transportation and travel to the site for our workforce and to provide them with secure and safe storage, particularly in light of some of the crime that's taken place in our own bike racks at the front of our building. As David alluded to, we've worked together, particularly over the past year, to improve our working relationship and address some of the operational issues. And we continue to remain committed to that working relationship, to find ways of working together that are least impactful. But as a public organisation and a steward of public funds, we need to operate as financially sensitively as we possibly can, whilst retaining that working within planning guidelines. We recognise that, and we submit this planning application to address some of our operational issues and to fulfil some of our environmental ambitions as well. COVID continues to be an uncertainty for us. The canopy proposition enables us to consider how we segregate our staff from our patients and using indoor and outdoor space as creatively as we possibly can. We've set up a staff rest area outside because we wanted to create a summer outdoor space where they could socially distance and take a rest break. And the canopy gives us an option for providing waiting space outside to keep patients and staff separate. In conclusion, we want to work environmentally and improve our environmental impact, and we want to work safely, and we want to work as efficiently as we possibly can, and this application is made with those outputs in mind.
Thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, who'd like to ask questions? Malcolm first.
For Mr. Jackson, your application only talks about 3 items, that is a cycle shelter, a screened skip enclosure, and a canopy, which will be glass, not polycarbonate. But on the drawings we've got, there's a 4th red outline, and it's shown on your plan as well, and that is labelled compactor. Why it's on the extreme left of that drawing, but why is that included with the 3 buildings you're applying for?
So, as part of the response to some of the operational issues we had a series of wheelie bins, the large 1100 litre wheelie bins that were collected from there's like an alleyway between one of our buildings and the houses on Stuart's Grave. It's actually just above the building there. You can't see it on the plan. And what we wanted to do was the waste vehicle would stop in the middle of Stuart's Grove and collect those bins and be parked up there for half an hour running its operation. And we wanted to condense that footprint into a single compactor so that we could optimise our collection of recyclable materials into one area. And to do that, we had to reposition the bulk waste skip, which is an enclosed lockable skip. Because the red area that you refer to, adjacent to that, just above it on the drawing, is an existing compactor, and therefore the power infrastructure is provided in that location for the compacting, and an operation that already exists.
Does the compactor have a planning permission to be there?
I'm not sure, to be truthful.
And are you suggesting it's part of this application?
I would suggest that if it doesn't have planning permission, that we should seek to include it as part of this
application.
We could make a separate application for it.
Okay, thank you. So it's only the 3 solid red blocks.
Yes.
That we're looking at. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. The question to Mr. Fowler, the objector. Would you be happy if the skip is moved to another space where it's far from the residential area? I could see, I think it's about a metre or 2 next to the wall of one of the buildings, I think number 14 or something. But would you be happy if that's relocated far away so that you to mitigate the noise? Whether it's a...
Well, sorry, just to clarify your question, to say elsewhere in the car park or elsewhere on the site?
Elsewhere in the car park, because obviously...
So we are, we think the skip, and there are 2 skips currently on site, one without planning permission in the dangerous area in the Oratory Lane, and then one at the front in an area beside the loading bay. And that's where it is currently operating at our suggestion, or we suggested there, I'm sure they thought it was good too, when we first discussed the skip coming on site, which was a good example of the collaborative working. We suggest it remains there, and as you read the report, it says it is awkward there. And it is more awkward for delivery driver to come and have to reverse into an area that is also close to a loading bay. But we prefer them to work harder on that rather than move the skip, take up the welfare area, bring another truck in down the single lane Stewart's Grove, reversing in. We have trouble with the commercial deliveries reversing all the way down the street at the minute and having access to it. So we think there are other sites that are currently working and continue to work, and we suggested things such as putting in a sliding gate rather than a gate that closes across it. There were budget concerns about that, and also about the minibus that is parked blocking it. It could be parked in the executive car park or in the nice big car park here.
Right, just a follow-up question to Mr. Jackson. Based on Mr. Fowler's comment, is it the budget that's stopping you to relocate? Or, based on the advice?
There certainly is a budget element to it. The implications in that vicinity are difficult and problematic. It's on a slope, so and it's at the front of the building, so it's got its main. You're looking at the main facade of the Marsden, albeit to the left. Within the delivery yard is quite restricted anyway, with a number of other deliveries that come in. Our laundry comes in daily. Our materials that are used for clinical operations come in there daily. So it's a very, very busy delivery yard, and is often populated with cages of equipment that's being moved onto site and then between sites, between our Chelsea and our Sutton sites. So logistically, it's a very complicated area. It's very limited in terms of space because there's protruding buildings either side of the delivery yard, generator room one side, and on the other side we've got some other bin store areas as well. So it's particularly problematic to have it there, and there's been concerns raised by our internal health and safety team on one of the locations, and the second location is particularly complicated because we've got large gates on the delivery yard that have to be, the vehicle has to come in, the gates have to be closed, the vehicle has to manoeuvre in quite a tight space, and they've objected to that operation, they being our contractor.
Thanks.
Actually, I've got a question for Mr. Farlow. Excuse me. In the report as in front of us, the operation, the hours of operation for the skip, it's proposed 7 till 11 p.m. And did I hear you suggest that you thought, well, ideally 8 to 5 might be more acceptable? And allied to that, from the drawings that I think we saw, it seems as though this skip enclosure has sort of artificial greening. If there was some sort of covering to this enclosure, maybe it was something that had to be put across, and obviously it would have to be taken away when the skip was removed. Is that something that has any appeal to you?
Obviously, to hold the more awkward site has more appeal to us, especially the things we suggest to improve. But given this site, given we've worked hard with the Marsden to limit deliveries between 8 and 5, they have signage on their gates that says deliveries only accepted between 8 and 5. The gates are closed at 8 and 5. It would appear sensible to match to those same timings that appear to be, outside hours that would create more noise, the busy traffic time for people leaving with their kids and families down the street, etc.
Markham, yeah.
One of the objectors sent in a photograph of the whole yard. It's the first photograph that we've got. I think it relates probably to that left-hand photograph on the screen. I can see the existing bicycle shed, and I can see a number of porta cabins, and there's something like a blue container. Can you tell me what the blue container is?
The blue container was contained there without planning permission, that we requested Chris, through Chris to the estates team, to move, and only when we threatened, well, when we started proceedings of breach of planning, did that blue container get moved away. And it's our concern that the bicycle shed would similarly be conveniently used for storage on site if it was put in place as a large wooden building, which is why we prefer to have just traditional cycle shelters rather than a large enclosed building on site that could be diverted its use elsewhere.
So the question was for Mr. Jackson. What is that blue container?
That blue container was brought in for a build project to accommodate equipment that was being delivered to site. It's subsequently gone, so it's no longer there. Yeah, as a temporary building.
Equipment storage?
Yes, for a designated project.
Okay, good. Yep. What's your intended use of this space? Can I just get it clear? Is this space car parking and bicycles? Is it recycling? Is it deliveries? Is it storage?
So we just picking up on the planning report that's come in, there's a requirement for us to be able to turn a vehicle on that site. So that puts a designated use onto that area. We need to use our footprint as effectively and safely as we possibly can. We will review the turning circles and see what's left and determine how we will use that space moving forward, whether we provide off-road parking for contractors who are coming onto our site, which is something that we've tried to do to, again, alleviate some of the problems on Stewart's Grove, or whether we designate it as the remaining parking spaces for staff. I think it will probably be the former rather than the latter, particularly as we're encouraging our staff to cycle.
So you're using it for all those purposes: a turning space, a car park, cycle storage, recycling, tool storage, porta cabins, which look like accommodation, and you're using it for compactors, for waste recycling?
Yeah, it's for some of our facilities.
And as deliveries?
Yeah, so our catering deliveries come in through that entrance too.
What's in the porta cabins?
In the porta cabin, the one to the bottom left of the left-hand picture is our occupational health department. That building's been in place for a number of years.
What department?
Occupational health.
Occupational health. So patients are using this area as well?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? No. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that. So, questions to Mrs. Hurrell. Perhaps I'll go first. I mean, we've got a number of photographs. It turns out that actually some of the structures, in fact, possibly have been removed. But I mean, the whole place looks a bit of a mess. But however, I'm concerned that somewhere being a bit of a mess probably isn't a material planning consideration, unfortunately. I'm not convinced. In terms of the cycle shed proposal, I mean, it seems a very large structure, but we're convinced that that is within. I mean, obviously, it's a very large hospital, so the principle of having extensive cycle storage, I suppose, is not unreasonable.
Yeah, indeed, it's something really that our local plan does support, is to encourage more sustainable travel. And a hospital of this size, you know, if they want to increase the cycle provision on site, it's something that really our development plan says we should be doing. We've heard there's concerns that it could be used for something other than cycle storage. I don't see any harm if you wanted to put on a condition to secure that it could only be used for that purpose. I think that would be entirely appropriate.
And my final point, I just wanted to check that the hours of operation relating to the skip, that is something presumably that I mean, I think 7 till 11 p.m. is far too long. But that's something that we could reasonably do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's within your gift
what we all thought.
to change the hours as you feel more appropriate.
Right. Okay. All right. Colleagues, actually, Sina, you go first and then Markham.
Just to satisfy the objector's conditions, can we propose the two conditions? The first being the hours of operation of the skip being restricted from 8 to 5, the second being the use of the cycle storage as just that. Would that seem acceptable to committee members?
I'm happy.
Is that what you proposed? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm happy.
Sorry.
Yes, I just, through you, Chairman, I just confirmed that I think both those conditions are appropriate and absolutely within your gift to put on. So, yeah.
The council chamber is a fantastic venue in many respects. However, it does mean that it's very difficult that if you're pointing at one person and the other person can't hear what you're saying. But yes, that was exactly the point that I was exploring earlier on. Do I get the feel that others go along with that? Malcolm, I think you were, sorry.
Yes.
Can I ask, planning use? I mean, this site seems to have become multi-purpose, and I wonder if they're actually breaching any potential planning uses, because it seems odd to me that a car park, could have skips put anywhere, doesn't need planning permission. You can put a skip in a car park. It's not a planning matter. The structure, to house it is a planning structure. Okay, the bike shed's a planning structure, and the covered walkway is a planning structure. But it's what I think we've uncovered here is the use of this site. Those three structures don't worry me at all. They all seem to be perfectly acceptable. But I think behind this, we ought to look at the use of this site, because a lot of the residents' complaints are about the hours of operation and the types of operation that are going on. Because we've already heard we've got large lorries doing three-point turns. We've got patients coming for occupational health in hospital buildings. We've got what looks like gas or liquid storage at the back. And we've got compactors, which is sort of approaching industrial waste recycling. And it seems quite bizarre to me that all these different uses have been dumped into the middle of a residential area with literally no planning control on all these different aspects. And I wonder if, at the very least, we could ask as a condition on these three structures that this area is as part of the management plan for delivery and servicing, that the area is kept clean and tidy, which is one of the complaints of the residents.
Yep, so I think a couple of key points there to draw upon. In terms of the use, we wouldn't class the car park area and all these individual pockets of land or individual buildings as individual planning units. It's all part of the Marsden site, so it's a hospital use, and this space is all ancillary, so all the different elements. You're absolutely right, it seems like there's a hell of a lot going on in the car park area, all different uses, some which might conflict with others, and you can understand some of the residents' concerns that many of these uses perhaps are difficult to be located immediately adjacent to residential properties. Touching on that is why we've recommended the delivery and servicing management plan, which is condition 7. That needs to cover delivery vehicles, the skip exchange vehicles, and I think it would be entirely appropriate to include within that an expectation of how the area would generally be maintained as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions? Okay, in that case, I think we can move to make a decision. The recommendation is to grant with the conditions. I would suggest that we amend its condition 5, hours of skip operation, 8 till 5 p.m. I think we should add a condition that the large cycle store is only used for that purpose. Yeah, and I think, and also take on board the point that Councillor Spalding made, condition 7, the delivery and servicing management plan. I think if it's possible within that condition to insist on a greater degree of control as to how this as you obviously correctly say, an ancillary area of the hospital, of how that is used, bearing in mind its location.
Yep, I think we could just slightly tweak the wording of number 7 just to reflect that we also want it to encourage some general maintenance measures as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chairman. I was just thinking, the hours of operation could be extended to 7 p.m. I don't see that. The hours of operations of the skip could be extended to 7 p.m. I don't, that's my opinion rather than 5 p.m. I think 5 p.m. would be...
Can I just quickly ask, 8 till 5, 8 till 7, do we think that's reasonable? Just how do people feel about that?
The objectors mentioned that there are other items which are 8 till 5, so it makes sense to line them all up together.
Okay. You concur with that? Okay, all right. Well, in that case, I'm going to put to a vote. Recommendation is to grant with the conditions. Condition number 5, 8 to 5 p.m. New condition, the cycle store used as a cycle store only, and also slight rewording of condition 7, which is about management plan. So on that basis, can I see those in favour, please? So that's granted on that basis. Thank you very much. Thank you. Can we now move on to consider application at 8 Collingham Place, please?
Thank you very much, Chairman. The proposal is for a single-storey infill extension at the rear of the site. The existing on the left-hand side and the proposed on the right. It's quite hard to see on this image as they're such a tall buildings, but hopefully you can make out my cursor and just see the infill there on the left-hand of the two images. Better probably understood in elevation and section. So you can see the existing closet wing extension and the new infill extension, which could extend almost to the level of the closet wing. There would be a slight setback. You'll also see the proposals incorporate leaving an area open as a light well. Again, probably best understood in floor plan, so you can see that light well area where my red arrow is, and then the extension continuing along here. The final bit of the proposal is for a pergola in the garden, which would be located right at the rear of the site. Just to finish, some photographs. This just shows you the blank elevation of the neighbouring property, so the infill would be where my cursor is on the left-hand image, with a little light well area left there where you can see that step ladder to allow some light to still go through the window you can just make out there in the image. And then the final picture is of the rear boundary where the proposed pergola would be located. Thank you.
Any questions about this? No? Okay, all right. Well, in that case, the recommendation is to grant permission with the conditions set out in the report. Can I see those in favour, please? So that's granted. Thank you. And then finally, staying in the South Pack, can we look at Pond House, Pond Place?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just two slides to show you the red outline on the aerial photograph on the screen there just shows you the extent of the site, so a few buildings there. The proposal is to upgrade and replace the windows on all the properties. They're aluminium single glazed at the moment, and the proposal is for aluminium double glazed windows. There's a photograph just to give you an idea of the existing appearance of the building and the windows in situ.
Any questions about this? No, I think this is again, this is council-owned property, and I think presumably part of the council's extremely large capital programme for its own housing stock. Yeah,
that's right. You'll be familiar. We've had a few of these come to committee, and expect more to follow as well. It's part of a big programme of works.
Okay, thank you. So the recommendation is to grant permission. Can I see those in favour, please? So that's granted. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, everyone. Thank you.
It was a North Kensington one, so that's a big because my yeah.
Allow me to continue.
You're bad at the mission.
Well, I did it. Area. Yes, sir. You snuck things in and all the codes. You bought my first in.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that.
I've got it standard at the moment.
Did you change your jacket?
No. That's sold, yeah. The David was gone. So it went to Anthony Christopher Townley, who run sheep farm in Derbyshire.
Wow.
Weeks.
What, you came all the way down?
Yeah, and he started driving it straight back, which he did, until it went. So I've got to be frank, so I've got 500 ewes about to have lambs. So it must be the late spring. So that's got the new so,
Yes, I am.
which is,
Did you buy a new one?
so I might get a little bit.
Oh, right, okay.
So my last shot is to get the exec council.
I can't make a charge.
Oh, it's on Tuesday.
Try to plug it in.
I knew it was going to be. Oh, it's right. It's an email at home. I left it. Oh, right, so Tuesday evening on Zoom.
No, but is that a free one?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, if it's a free one, then
my last shot.
if not, then you have to pay for it. And then
Probably online is the account.
I don't know if it's free one because I never used it. But if they're free, then yes.
Relying on you.
Or we could try if you want.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. See you.
Are you on the exec council?
The exec comes.
Yes. Of this association.
Oh yes, I am.
Oh, good. Yeah. There's a notice to miss on Tuesday. Yeah. To confirm all awards, which are pretty poor. Correct.
Andrew sent it in an email today.
That's the one.
To say this is a special meeting.
Correct. Would you vote against the Greens?
Well, which way
What
do
do you mean? What do you mean is they have to rerun it?
Which way do you want me to vote? Against the motion. So if it was incorporated,
It would be recommended for approval because there would be very few members that turned up.
then it was your ward and another one, wasn't it?
We were the only one where councillors were literally ousted. Yeah, there were some others which were really for it, but no one.
So the decisions, if they're recorded, the rules of the association say they have to go to.
So if they were for it, it bypasses the exec. That's it. It's only the ones which are in for it.
Go to the exec.
The exec has to rubber stamp it.
And we can say, no, we don't rubber stamp it, we want to go back to the
Correct.
exec.